Contributions to troop deployments. India has consistently been one of the largest contributors of troops to UN peacekeeping missions. As of March 2021, India had deployed over 5,400 military personnel, making it the third largest contributor of uniformed personnel to UN peacekeeping operations. Successful implementation of mandates. Indian peacekeepers have effectively carried out their mandated tasks, including protecting civilians, supporting peace processes, and promoting stability. They have played a vital role in maintaining security, providing humanitarian assistance, and facilitating the delivery of basic services. For example, in the UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, Indian peacekeepers have been involved in numerous successful initiatives such as providing medical assistance to conflict-affected communities, constructing infrastructure, and facilitating humanitarian aid distribution. Contributions to civilian protection. Indian peacekeepers have been actively engaged in protecting civilians and promoting human rights in conflict zones. They have played a crucial role in preventing and responding to incidents of violence, including sexual and gender-based violence. For example, in the UN Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, MONUSCO, Indian peacekeepers have conducted successful operations to protect civilians from armed groups, contributing to reduction of violence in affected areas. Expertise in engineering and infrastructure development. Indian peacekeepers have excelled in engineering tasks and infrastructure development, playing a significant role in post-conflict reconstruction efforts. For example, in the UN mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, Indian engineering contingents have constructed critical infrastructure such as roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals, facilitating stability and development in the region. UN medals for service. A total of 836 troops from the Indian Army serving in UN peacekeeping operations in South Sudan were awarded UN medals for their exemplary services. They were acknowledged for their efforts in protecting civilians, facilitating humanitarian aid, supporting peace agreements, monitoring human rights violations, and ensuring dignity in challenging operational conditions. Critical/issues. 1. Allegations of human rights violations. There have been instances where Indian peacekeepers have faced allegations of human rights violations, including cases of sexual exploitation and abuse. These incidents tarnish the image of India's peacekeeping efforts and raise concerns about the conduct of its personnel. Example, in 2017, Indian peacekeepers were accused of sexual exploitation and abuse in the Central African Republic. The allegations highlighted the need for stricter accountability measures and better training to prevent such incidents. 2. Limited gender balance. India's peacekeeping contingents often lack gender balance, with a relatively low representation of women peacekeepers. According to data from the UN as of March 2021, only 5.4% of Indian peacekeepers were women, well below the UN's target of 15%. This gender imbalance limits the ability to effectively address gender-specific issues and engage with local communities. 3. Inadequate communication and language skills. Language barriers can hinder effective communication between Indian peacekeepers and the local population. Language skills, especially in the local dialects, are crucial for building trust, understanding the needs of the community, and ensuring effective coordination with other peacekeeping forces. Example, in missions like the UN Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, MONUSCO, language barriers can make it challenging for Indian peacekeepers to effectively communicate with the Congolese population and address their concerns. 4. Delayed response and decision-making. Some observers have criticized the time taken by Indian peacekeepers to respond to emerging conflicts or crises. There have been instances where delayed decision-making and response have affected the effectiveness of peacekeeping operations. Shunya IAS. Example, in the 2013 crisis in South Sudan, Indian peacekeepers were accused of delayed response and failure to protect civilians during the violent conflict between government and rebel forces. 5. Challenges in mandate implementation. Implementing complex peacekeeping mandates can be challenging, and Indian peacekeepers are not immune to these difficulties. It requires adapting to dynamic situations, engaging with various stakeholders, and effectively balancing peacekeeping objectives with the sovereignty and security concerns of the host country. Way forward by C. Rajamohan, picking up the tab for peace. To be effective, India will need to step up cooperation with major powers and regional partners like the African Union, as well as go beyond troop contribution to provide training, logistical and operational support, and conflict mediation support both through bilateral and multilateral processes. It will also need to expand domestic defense capabilities and strengthen military diplomacy. The recent agreement between the United States and India on jointly training peacekeepers from 6 African nations is indicative of a changing Indian approach to peacekeeping. Brahimi Report. The Brahimi Report, published in 2000, was a landmark assessment of United Nations peacekeeping operations. IL highlighted several key issues and made recommendations for improving the effectiveness of UN peacekeeping. Here are some of the report's highlights. In detail. Comprehensive approach. The report emphasized the need for a comprehensive approach to peacekeeping, recognizing that political, military, and humanitarian efforts should be integrated. It emphasized the importance of addressing root causes of conflict, promoting good governance, and facilitating post-conflict reconstruction and development. Protection of civilians. The report emphasized the importance of protecting civilians in conflict zones. It highlighted the Need for peacekeeping missions to have clear guidelines and resources to effectively protect civilian populations from violence and human rights abuses. This included developing strategies to prevent and respond to sexual exploitation and abuse by peacekeeping personnel. Quality and capacities. The report stressed the importance of having well-trained and properly equipped peacekeeping forces. It recommended enhancing the training and professionalism of peacekeepers, improving the recruitment and selection processes, and ensuring adequate resources for peacekeeping missions. The report called for increasing the pool of qualified personnel available for peacekeeping operations. Mandate clarity and realism. The report emphasized the need for clear and achievable mandates for peacekeeping missions. It called for realistic expectations and adequate resources to implement the mandates effectively. The report recommended regular reviews and adjustments of mandates to reflect evolving situations on the ground. Cooperation and coordination. The report underscored the importance of cooperation and coordination among all stakeholders involved in peacekeeping efforts. It called for better coordination between the UN, member states, regional organizations, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to ensure effective collaboration and sharing of responsibilities. The Brahimi report served as a catalyst for significant reforms in UN peacekeeping. Its recommendations led to the establishment of the Peacebuilding Commission, the creation of the Department of Peacekeeping Operations (DPKO), and the Department of Field Support (DFS) within the UN Secretariat, and improvements in training and oversight mechanisms. It highlighted the challenges and shortcomings of peacekeeping and paved the way for subsequent initiatives to strengthen and improve UN peacekeeping operations. India and UNSC Permanent Seat. Continue from Unit 9, Part A. The establishment of the United Nations UN permanent members, also known as the P5 or the Big Five, dates back to the formation of the organization itself. The UN was founded in 1945 following World War II with the primary goal of promoting international peace and security. The selection of the permanent members and their privileged status within the UN was outlined in the UN Charter. The organization's founding document, the Charter, granted permanent membership and veto power in the UN Security Council to 5 countries: the United States, the Soviet Union, later replaced by Russia, the United Kingdom, France, and China. These countries were chosen based on their status as major powers at the time and their involvement in the war against the Axis powers during World War II. The intention behind establishing permanent members was to ensure that the most influential and powerful nations had a central role in international decision-making and maintaining global peace. Sunyas. The permanent members have the authority to veto any substantive resolution brought before the Security Council, which can hinder the adoption of measures or actions even if they have the support of a majority of member states. This veto power was intended to prevent any single nation from dominating the decision-making process and to ensure that the major powers have a stake in the decisions made by the Security Council. Advantages of being a P5. Veto power. Permanent members can veto resolutions allowing them to protect their national interests. Example: Russia and China vetoed multiple resolutions related to the Syrian conflict. Global influence. They have significant influence in shaping international discussions and agendas. Example: the United States played a pivotal role in the negotiations of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Decision-making authority. They have a central role in decision-making within the Security Council. Example: the United Kingdom and France led the authorization of military intervention in Libya in 2011. Legitimacy and prestige. Permanent members enjoy a higher level of legitimacy and prestige in the international community. Example: China's permanent seat reflects its growing economic and political power on the global stage. Long-term engagement. Permanent membership provides stability and allows for long-term engagement in global affairs. Example: the United Kingdom's permanent seat ensures its consistent involvement in addressing global challenges and shaping international norms. Quotes BD scholars. Shashi Tharoor. India's global relevance and contributions in various areas make a strong case for its permanent seat at the UN. Its consistent support for multilateralism and its ability to bridge divides make it an essential voice in shaping global affairs. Ramak Bandra Guha. There is a need for internal development rather than be in the race for superstardom. Raghuram Rajan. India's rise as a major power demands a recalibration of global institutions, including the UN Security Council. Its population, economic potential, and contributions to peacekeeping make it a deserving candidate for permanent membership. C. Rajamohan. India is a legitimate candidate for a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. Its growing global influence, economic strength, and commitment to multilateralism make it a natural choice for expanded membership. BB other nations. France. France recognizes India's legitimate aspiration to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. India's contributions to peacekeeping, its economic strength, and its commitment to international cooperation make it a valuable candidate for permanent membership. Emmanuel Macron. Owns IA. India's claim to a permanent seat. Association with the UN. India, a founding member of the UN, actively participates in UN initiatives and has a strong record of engagement. It has been offered a permanent seat in the past but declined due to Cold War politics. India has served multiple terms as a non-permanent member. Notably, it has a significant number of peacekeepers deployed, surpassing even some P5 countries. India's intrinsic value. India's case for a permanent seat at the UNSC is bolstered by its status as the largest democracy and second most populous country. Its growing economy and nuclear weapons capability further strengthen its claim. India's active engagement in global politics, sustainable development, and its inclusion in international export control regimes demonstrate its expanding international profile. The support for India's bid comes from the G4 countries, a majority of the current permanent members of the UNSC, and a majority of countries in the UN General Assembly. Leader of Global South, India's prominent position among third world nations is evident through its leadership in the non-aligned movement and G77 group. Therefore, granting India a permanent seat at the UNSC would enhance its status as a moralistic force for developing countries and contribute to a more democratic composition of the Security Council. World's largest democracy, India's functioning democracy is a significant credential that strengthens its case for a permanent seat at the UN. As the world's largest democracy, India has a robust democratic system, free and fair elections, and a strong commitment to the rule of law. India's democratic credentials demonstrate its ability to represent diverse perspectives and effectively contribute to global decision-making processes within the UN. Shunya IAS. Contribution to peacekeeping. India's substantial contribution of troops and its proven capabilities in peacekeeping operations highlight its readiness and effectiveness in addressing global security challenges. This experience and expertise make India a valuable candidate for a permanent seat at the UN, as it can contribute to shaping peacekeeping policies and strategies on a long-term basis. Military strength. India's robust military capabilities serve as a significant credential for its bid for a permanent seat at the UN. With the world's second-largest standing army and advanced military technologies, India possesses the capacity to contribute effectively to global peace and security. India has a long history of participating in UN peacekeeping missions and has consistently been one of the largest contributors of troops. Issues to India's membership. Reform deadlock. The process of expanding the UN Security Council and granting permanent seats has faced resistance and a lack of consensus among member states. Various proposals for reform have been put forth, but disagreements over criteria, representation, and veto power have hindered progress. Opposition from existing permanent members. The current permanent members who hold veto power may be reluctant to share their privileged status. They may perceive the addition of new permanent members as a potential dilution of their influence and decision-making authority. Geopolitical rivalries. The complex web of geopolitical rivalries and power dynamics within the international system has hindered the consensus necessary for UN Security Council reform. Competing interests among major powers have made it difficult to reach a consensus on the expansion of permanent seats. Lack of regional consensus. Some countries within India's region, such as Pakistan and China, have expressed reservations about India's bid for a permanent seat. Regional dynamics and historical conflicts play a role shaping positions on UN Security Council reform. In procedural challenges, the process of amending the UN Charter to expand the Security Council and grant permanent seats requires a high threshold of support and agreement among member states. The complexity and lengthy nature of the reform process have made it difficult to achieve significant progress. Non-signatory to NPT. India's non-signatory status to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, is one of the factors that has hindered its progress towards obtaining a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. The NPT is a multilateral treaty. Non-signatory to NPT. India's non-signatory status to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, is one of the factors that has hindered its progress towards obtaining a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. The NPT is a multilateral treaty aimed at preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, promoting disarmament, and facilitating the peaceful use of nuclear energy. The existing permanent members of the UN Security Council are all recognized nuclear weapon states under the NPT. They argue that adherence to the NPT demonstrates a commitment to non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament, which are seen as important criteria for permanent membership. Opposition from Coffee Club. Uniting for Consensus, UFC, nicknamed the Coffee Club, is a movement that developed in the 1990s in opposition to the possible expansion of permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council. Under the leadership of Italy, it aims to counter the bids for permanent seats proposed by G4 nations, Brazil, Germany, India, and Japan, and is calling for a consensus before any decision is reached on the form and size of the United Nations Security Council. Uniting for Consensus Coffee Club. The Coffee Club, also known as the Uniting for Consensus UFC group, is a bloc of countries that have come together to oppose the bid of the G4 countries, Brazil, Germany, India, and Japan, for permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council, UNSC. The Coffee Club consists of various countries, including Italy, Argentina, Pakistan, South Korea, and others. The main contention of the Coffee Club is against the idea of adding more permanent members to the UNSC. They argue that such an expansion would lead to an imbalance of power and compromise the principles of representation, democracy, and accountability. Instead, they advocate for an expansion of non-permanent seats, which they believe would provide a more equitable and inclusive representation of different regions and countries. The premise of the Coffee Club is based on the belief that the UNSC should undergo reforms that ensure greater transparency, fairness, and effectiveness. They emphasize the need to involve a larger number of countries in decision-making processes and voice concerns about the concentration of power in a few permanent members. The Coffee Club contends that UNSC reforms should be guided by a democratic and consultative approach, taking into account the interests and perspectives of a wide range of nations. Thus, the Coffee Club presents an alternative perspective to the G4 countries' pursuit of permanent seats, advocating for a more comprehensive and inclusive approach to UNSC reforms. India's strategies in seeking a permanent seat. Diplomatic outreach. India has engaged in extensive diplomatic efforts to garner support for its bid. It has held bilateral meetings, participated in multilateral forums, and actively engaged with other member states to gain their endorsement. For instance, India has collaborated with countries like Brazil, Germany, and Japan as part of the G4 group to collectively advocate for UNSC reforms and their inclusion as permanent members. Regional alliances. India has leveraged its regional influence and alliances to strengthen its case for a permanent seat. As a founding member of the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM, and a key member of the Group of 77, G77, India has garnered support from other developing nations. IL has highlighted its commitment to representing the interests of the Global South and emphasized the need for equitable representation in the UNSC. Active participation in UN initiatives. India has actively participated in various UN initiatives and demonstrated its commitment to global issues. It has contributed troops to UN peacekeeping missions, engaged in climate change discussions, and supported the implementation of sustainable development goals. India's proactive engagement showcases its willingness to play a responsible role in international affairs, thereby strengthening its credentials for a permanent seat. Soft power projection. India has projected its soft power globally to enhance its influence and gamer support. For its bid, it has emphasized its rich cultural heritage, contributions to art, literature, music, and spirituality, as well as its vibrant democracy and pluralistic society. By showcasing its diverse and inclusive identity, India aims to establish itself as a natural choice for a permanent seat based on its values and principles. Engaging with the P5, India has actively engaged with the existing permanent members of the UNSC, known as the P5: United States, China, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom. It has sought their support and recognition of India's global stature and contributions. India has emphasized that its inclusion as a permanent member would enhance the Council's representativeness and effectiveness in addressing contemporary global challenges. Support for India's seat. G4 Group. India is part of the G4 Group, along with Brazil, Germany, and Japan, which collectively advocate for UN Security Council reform and seek permanent membership for themselves. These countries have supported each other's bids and have jointly proposed a common position on expanding the Security Council. African Union. The African Union has expressed its support for India's inclusion as a permanent member of the Security Council. India has maintained strong diplomatic ties with African nations and has actively engaged in development cooperation with the continent, which has led to increased support from African countries. Regional support. Many countries in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and other regions have voiced their support for India's bid. These countries recognize India's regional leadership, its contributions to peacekeeping operations, and its potential to address global challenges. Non-Aligned Movement. As a founding member and active participant in the Non-Aligned Movement, India enjoys support from numerous member states. This movement represents a significant group of countries that advocate for a more equitable and inclusive UN, supporting India's case for permanent membership. P5. The P5 itself, except China, have all backed proposals for reforms at the UNSC and supported India's bid for a permanent seat through those reforms. What should be India's strategy? Scholars' perspective/suggestions. 1. R.C. Guha emphasizes the importance of internal development and advises against a race for superstardom. Suggests that India should focus on its own growth and progress rather than solely seeking global recognition. 2. C. Rajamohan warns against allowing India to be bargained by Western countries in exchange for permanent membership in the UNSC. Cites the example of India's submission of its intended nationally determined contributions (INDC) in the context of climate change negotiations, where compromises may have been made for the sake of pursuing UNSC membership. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B Shunya IAS. 3. Professor Ramesh Thakur advocates for non-cooperation with the UN to make it realize the importance of India's role, suggests that India should actively engage with forums like the G20, which he believes should ideally function like the UNSC. 4. Chinmay Garg encourages a realistic approach towards the UNSC and its reform. Proposes pursuing practical reforms such as seeking semi-peripheral membership rather than pushing for immediate permanent membership. Standard conclusions. India is widely recognized as an emerging global power, and there is a clear demand for greater inclusivity and democracy in international organizations such as the United Nations. In light of these factors, India is asserting its justified position in the evolving framework of global governance, which encompasses the United Nations Security Council. The support received from various countries and regional groupings demonstrates the recognition of India's contributions and potential in addressing global challenges. India and the nuclear question, changing. Unit 7. Perceptions and Policy. Previous year's questions. Is India's nuclear doctrine a viable one? 150 words. 2013 discussed the grounds for India's opposition to NPT. 2014, In 1998, India declared itself as a nuclear weapon state. India refuses to sign NPT and CPT. What would be TLI? Implications for India's nuclear policy if it signs both treaties? 2015, critically analyze India's nuclear policy. 2016. Explain TLI socio-economic impacts of TLI arms race and identify the obstacles in the way of disarmament. 2016, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, still needs to achieve the ultimate objective of global nuclear disarmament. Discuss the deficiency in the provision of NPT. 2017, given the recent developments in TLI region, do you think there is a need to change India's no first use NFU nuclear policy? 2019, discuss the efficacy of India's no first use policy nuclear weapons in the context of the evolving strategic challenges of its neighbors. 2020, examine the evolution of India's role in the global nuclear order. 2021. Discuss the reasons behind India's refusal to sign TLI Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. 2022. Background / In 1947, when India emerged as a free country to take its rightful place in the comedy of nations, the nuclear age had already dawned. Our leaders then took the crucial decision to opt for self-reliance and freedom of thought and action. We rejected TLI Cold War paradigm whose shadows were already appearing on the horizon, and instead of aligning ourselves with either bloc, chose the more difficult path of non-alignment. Indigenous Development X. Peaceful Nuclear Program. India's pursuit of nuclear technology began in the 1950s with the establishment of its peaceful nuclear program. The focus was on utilizing nuclear energy for various peaceful purposes, including power generation, agriculture, and healthcare. J. Under the leadership of Dr. Homi J. Bhabha, often referred to as the father of India's nuclear program, India made significant strides in developing indigenous capabilities in nuclear science and technology. The establishment of institutions such as the Bhabha Atomic Research Center (BRC) played a crucial role in conducting research, development, and training in various nuclear disciplines. One of the major milestones of India's peaceful nuclear program was the commissioning of the Tarapur Atomic Power Station in 1969, marking the country's entry into the League of Nuclear Power Producers. Pokhran. In 1974, India conducted its first nuclear test, codenamed Pokhran. This test, also known as the Smiling Buddha, demonstrated India's nuclear capabilities and marked its entry into the nuclear club. Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. India, being a non-signatory of the NPT, maintained its stance on not joining the treaty due to concerns over its discriminatory nature. India argued that the NPT perpetuated a divide between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. Pokhran II. In 1998, India conducted a series of nuclear tests known as Pokhran II, which included both nuclear weapon tests and a thermonuclear test. These tests drew international attention and sparked debates on India's nuclear ambitions. Nuclear Doctrine. In 2003, India declared its nuclear doctrine, which outlined its policy on the use of nuclear weapons. India's doctrine emphasizes a credible minimum deterrence posture, stating that nuclear weapons are solely for self-defense and as a deterrent against nuclear threats. Civil Nuclear Cooperation. In 2008, India reached a landmark civil nuclear cooperation agreement with TLI United States, known as the Indo-US Nuclear Deal. This agreement granted India access to civilian nuclear technology and fuel despite its status as a non-NPT country. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B. Shunya IAS. Why India acquired nuclear weapons. The acquisition of nuclear weapons by India can be attributed to a combination of factors. Security concerns. India's acquisition of nuclear weapons was driven by its security considerations, particularly the need to establish a credible deterrent vis-a-vis China and address perceived threats from Pakistan's nuclear capabilities. Disappointment with non-proliferation regime. India's dissatisfaction with the global non-proliferation regime, which it viewed as discriminatory, contributed to its decision to pursue nuclear weapons independently. Loss of nuclear umbrella. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the consequent loss of security assurances, India sought to develop its own nuclear capabilities to fill the gap left by the absence of a protective nuclear umbrella. Domestic and ideological factors. Domestic political considerations, including right-wing ideology, played a role in shaping India's nuclear ambitions. The desire for global recognition and prestige also motivated Indian scientists and policymakers. Geopolitical and regional dynamics. The changing geopolitical landscape, coupled with India's quest for regional influence, further propelled its decision to acquire nuclear weapons as a means of asserting its strategic autonomy and enhancing its position in international affairs. Scholars' view on India's acquisition of nuclear weapons. C. Rajamohan, in discussing the appropriateness of acquiring nuclear weapons, points out that India's contradictory goals of peace and global power led to it becoming a reluctant nuclear power. This implies that India sought to balance its aspirations for peace and global influence, ultimately deciding to pursue nuclear weapons as a calculated risk. 27 Happy Face. Manu Matai's work, titled Nuclear Power, Economic Development, Environment, and Disarmament, likely explores the interplay between these factors and their impact on India's nuclear program. It may delve into the considerations of nuclear power in relation to economic development, environmental concerns, and disarmament efforts. Nehru emphasizes that India will defend itself by any means necessary if threatened. This suggests that India's decision to acquire nuclear weapons /was driven by the imperative to safeguard its national security in the face of potential threats. Disarmament for India. India's relationship with nuclear disarmament goes back a long way. Ever since independence, Indian governments have not let go of any opportunity, whatever the forum, to press upon the international community the urgent need for universal and time-bound nuclear disarmament. In fact, even before India attained independence, Jawaharlal Nehru had stated in 1940, both because of our adherence to the principle of non-violence and from practical considerations arising from our understanding of world events, we believe that complete disarmament of all nation-states should be aimed at as in fact an urgent necessity if the world is not to be reduced to barbarism. The moral tone set by Gandhi and Nehru has largely directed the Indian posture on nuclear disarmament for a good part of India's independent history. From the 1950s, when Nehru had pioneered proposals for worldwide nuclear disarmament, including the ideas of a nuclear test ban treaty and a freeze on the production of fissile material, to the 1982 Program of Action on Disarmament and later, the 1988 Rajiv Gandhi Action Plan for ushering in a nuclear weapon-free and nonviolent world order, and then the 1993 Resolution for securing an early global ban on the production of fissile material, India's official nuclear policy has remained guided by the desire to attain a state of universal nuclear disarmament. Change in nuclear policy. The debate on nuclear disarmament within India cannot be described as having grown into a monolith. Rather, voices of dissent to the official position had begun to be heard as far back as the early 1960s after India's defeat at the hands of the Chinese and then the demonstration of Chinese nuclear capability. Both these developments gave rise to a pro-bomb lobby, though its reach remained limited. Over the next 2 decades, both sides, pro-bomb and anti-bomb, shared the room for maneuverability as the official Indian position remained one of nuclear ambiguity. The sense of idealism and the principled approach was adequately balanced by the belief that national security considerations demanded the amiability. Shunya IAS. Nuclear treaties and India. Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is a landmark international treaty whose objective is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and weapons technology, to promote cooperation in the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and to further the goal of achieving nuclear disarmament and general and complete disarmament. The treaty represents the only binding commitment in a multilateral treaty to the goal of disarmament by the nuclear weapon states. Opened for signature in 1968, the treaty entered into force in 1970. The treaty is reviewed every 5 years in meetings called review conferences. Even though the treaty was originally conceived with a limited duration of 25 years, the signing parties decided, by consensus, to unconditionally extend the treaty indefinitely during the review conference in New York City on May 11, 1995. Causes leading to the treaty. 1. Nuclear arms race. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union intensified the nuclear arms race, with both countries rapidly expanding their nuclear arsenals. This arms race raised concerns about the spread of nuclear weapons to oilier states and the potential for nuclear proliferation. The development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, by both superpowers further escalated the arms race, heightening concerns about the potential proliferation of these advanced delivery systems. 2. Global concerns. The impact of nuclear weapons testing on the environment and human health became a significant concern. The fallout from atmospheric nuclear tests, such as the testing conducted by the United States in the Pacific and the Soviet Union in Kazakhstan, raised awareness about the dangers of nuclear weapons beyond military implications. Atoms for Peace Program. The Atoms for Peace Program, initiated by U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953, aimed to encourage the peaceful use of nuclear energy. It provided assistance to countries seeking to develop civilian nuclear power programs, such as India, which received support for its first research reactor, PSIR, in 1956. 18-Nation Disarmament Committee, ENDC. The 18-Nation Disarmament Committee. 4. Established in 1962, played a crucial role in shaping the discussions on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. It served as a forum for negotiations among participating countries, which eventually led to the drafting of the NPT. Risk to global peace and security. The proliferation of nuclear weapons was seen as a threat to global peace. 5. And security. More countries possessing nuclear weapons could lead to an increase in regional conflicts, nuclear arms races, and the potential use of nuclear weapons, which could have catastrophic consequences. Balance of power. The NPT aimed to prevent an imbalance of power among states by discouraging 6. Acquisition of nuclear weapons by non-nuclear weapon states. The treaty sought to maintain a balance where only a limited number of states possess nuclear capabilities, ensuring a level playing field and reducing the risk of conflicts driven by nuclear asymmetry. Non-discrimination and equality. The NPT enshrined the principles of non-discrimination and equality. 7. Among states. It recognized the rights of non-nuclear weapon states to access peaceful nuclear technology for development purposes, while placing obligations on nuclear weapon states to work towards disarmament and refrain from assisting others in acquiring nuclear weapons. Immediate cause. SES. Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, the discovery of Soviet missile installations in Cuba led to a tense standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. N. The crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war and highlighted the urgent need to prevent similar confrontations and mitigate the risks associated with nuclear weapons. India's nuclear program. In the 1960s, India's nuclear weapons program, coupled with the existing nuclear arsenals of major powers like the United States and the Soviet Union, created fears of a nuclear arms race. There was a concern that if more countries acquired nuclear weapons, it could lead to a destabilizing proliferation. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B. Shunya IAS BMMMMMM. Key highlights of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Non-Proliferation Objective. The primary objective of the NPT is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and to achieve disarmament. It seeks to limit the possession of nuclear weapons to the 5 recognized nuclear weapon states, NWS, while promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy, 3 pillars. The NPT is based on 3 pillars: non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful use of nuclear energy. These pillars are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. Nuclear weapon states, NWS. The NPT recognizes 5 nuclear weapon states: the United States, Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, that possessed nuclear weapons before January 1967. These states are allowed to possess nuclear weapons but are obligated to work towards disarmament. Non-nuclear weapon states, NNWS. Non-nuclear weapon states commit to not acquiring nuclear weapons and to accepting International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, safeguards on their nuclear activities. They have the right to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Safeguards and verification. The NPT requires all non-nuclear weapon states to conclude safeguards agreements with the IAEA to ensure that their nuclear activities are used exclusively for peaceful purposes. Safeguards involve inspections and monitoring to verify compliance. India's case. China was the last permanent member to test its first weapon in 1964, while India did so in 1974. Between those dates, in 1970 the NPT came into effect under its terms. China became recognized as one of the world's 5 weapon states, and India was excluded from such status. Thus, India was left with the choice of remaining outside the NPT or giving up any possibility of maintaining a nuclear weapon. In light of perceived strategic challenges from both China and Pakistan, India chose to be excluded from the NPT and go ahead with developing nuclear deterrence. India's stance on the NPT and why it has not joined it. Security concerns. India's decision was driven by security considerations, particularly perceived threats from Pakistan and China, as well as concerns about the United States' actions during the 1965 and 1971 wars. The demonstration of a nuclear weapons capability in the 1974 test allowed India to effectively hedge in an asymmetric international system and a regional strategic environment where it felt cornered. Autonomy and freedom of action. India prioritized maintaining political autonomy and freedom of action in its foreign policy choices. Joining the NPT's Grand Bargain, which restricts policy options in exchange for access to peaceful uses of nuclear energy, was seen as limiting India's strategic flexibility in a security environment marked by uncertainties. Treaty's non-proliferation obligations. The NPT places obligations on non-nuclear weapon states to refrain from developing or acquiring nuclear weapons. India, as a country with an established nuclear weapons program, would be required to dismantle its nuclear arsenal and submit to International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, safeguards. India has concerns about these non-proliferation obligations and the potential impact on its nuclear program. Domestic political imperatives and prestige. The timing and rhetoric of India's nuclear test were influenced by domestic political factors, such as the declining popularity of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. The claim of a peaceful nuclear explosion helped justify the action as not violating existing legal instruments. Global disarmament bias. According to India, the NPT only addresses horizontal proliferation, nuclear states transferring to non-nuclear states, while it does not address the concerns of vertical proliferation, nuclear states limiting and disarming their arsenals within a stipulated time. Thus, this creates a world of nuclear haves, have-nots, and shift in global perception. The Indo-US nuclear deal brought about a shift in the global perception of India's nuclear status. It highlighted India's rising stature as a responsible nuclear power and a potential partner in non-proliferation efforts. Some argued that the deal made the NPT less relevant for India, as it provided India with similar benefits and recognition without the need to join the treaty. Sanya's disparities within the NPT regime. The NPT distinguishes between nuclear weapon states, NWS, and non-nuclear weapon states, NNWS, creating a disparity in rights and obligations. Nuclear weapon states, NWS. The NPT recognizes 5 countries as nuclear weapon states: the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, and China. These states are allowed to possess nuclear weapons and are acknowledged as legitimate nuclear powers. Non-nuclear weapon states, NNWS remaining countries that have joined the NPT are categorized as non-nuclear weapon states. They are committed to refraining from developing or acquiring nuclear weapons and have the right to access peaceful nuclear technology for civilian purposes. The NUs are forbidden from getting nuclear weapons, although the NWS are in possession of them, which gives rise to the perception of inequality. This distinction has drawn criticism for maintaining a nuclear hierarchy and favoring a small number of nuclear-capable nations. Critics claim that the NPT strengthens a two-tiered system in which the NUs are subject to rigorous non-proliferation responsibilities, while the NWS maintain their nuclear arsenals without making any progress towards disarmament. Fairness and equal security are believed to be incompatible with this unequal treatment. Some claim that the NPT does not effectively handle the NUS disarmament commitments. Progress in lowering nuclear stockpiles has been slow despite parties' duties under Article 6 of the treaty to pursue discussions for nuclear disarmament in good faith. The legitimacy and effectiveness of the NPT in attaining its goals of disarmament are threatened by this apparent imbalance. Concerns have also been expressed about the availability of peaceful nuclear technology. The NUs, in particular developing nations, believe that the obstacles to gaining access to nuclear technology for peaceful uses are excessively great in comparison to the advantages that the NWS enjoys. The divide between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states is the root of the inequity in the NPT, which has been criticized for creating a nuclear hierarchy, making little progress towards disarmament, and limiting access to peaceful nuclear technology. The alleged injustices in the treaty have been the focus of these discussions and proposals for change. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, still needs to achieve the ultimate objective of global nuclear disarmament. Discuss the deficiency in the provision of NPT. 2017. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, is an international treaty aimed at preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, promoting disarmament, and facilitating the peaceful use of nuclear energy. However, critics argue that the NPT has failed to achieve its ultimate objective of global nuclear disarmament. Challenges in the treaty. Lack of binding disarmament obligations. One major criticism of the NPT is that it lacks binding disarmament obligations for the nuclear weapon states, NWS, recognized under the treaty. Scholars like Zia Mian argue that the absence of a specific timeline or concrete commitments for disarmament has allowed the NWS to retain and modernize their nuclear arsenals, undermining the ultimate objective of nuclear disarmament. Unequal bargain. Critics argue that the NPT primarily focuses on horizontal proliferation, preventing new states from acquiring nuclear weapons, but it has been less effective in addressing vertical proliferation, reducing the arsenals of existing nuclear weapon states. This limitation undermines the goal of global disarmament. Scholars like Tariq Rauf assert that this disparity in obligations undermines the credibility and effectiveness of the NPT. Ambiguities and interpretations. The NPT's language contains ambiguities and different interpretations, leading to disagreements on its implementation and obligations. Scholars argue that these ambiguities have allowed states to exploit loopholes or adopt selective compliance, undermining the effectiveness and universality of the treaty. Inadequate safeguards. The NPT relies on the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, to monitor and verify compliance with non-proliferation obligations. Critics argue that DIE safeguards are not foolproof and can be circumvented or manipulated by states pursuing covert nuclear programs. Scott D. Sagan argues for strengthening the IAEA's resources and authority to address these deficiencies. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B. Shunya IAS. Lack of universal membership. Not all countries have joined the NPT, which limits its effectiveness and the scope of disarmament efforts. Scholars argue that achieving global nuclear disarmament requires broader participation and engagement from all states, including those outside the NPT framework. Geostrategic challenges. The geopolitical dynamics among nuclear-armed states and regional tensions have posed challenges to the disarmament efforts envisioned by the NPT. Scholars point out that the security concerns and distrust among nuclear-armed states have hindered progress towards disarmament. Dual-use technology loopholes. Critics argue that the NPT does not adequately address the issue of dual use. Technologies which can be used for both civilian and military purposes. This loophole allows states to develop civilian nuclear programs that can potentially be diverted for military purposes, undermining non-proliferation efforts. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, has faced criticism for its deficiencies, which have hindered the achievement of the ultimate objective of global nuclear disarmament. Addressing these deficiencies and strengthening the treaty's provisions and enforcement mechanisms is crucial to revitalizing efforts towards nuclear disarmament and enhancing global security. Challenges. Still no prospect of nuclear disarmament. The NPT has failed to achieve nuclear disarmament, lacking progress. A formula for reducing nuclear holdings is needed, considering proportional reductions based on current arsenals. Challenges arise in including China in arms control talks, while different approaches are required for remaining possessors. Specific negotiations and regional zones free of weapons of mass destruction may be necessary. Horizontal proliferation. The NPT has not been effective in preventing the spread of nuclear weapons to Nuclear weapon states. Countries like North Korea have pursued nuclear weapons capabilities despite being signatories to the treaty. Vertical proliferation. The treaty has not prevented the modernization and advancement of existing nuclear arsenals by nuclear weapon states. The possession and development of more sophisticated nuclear weapons continue undermining disarmament efforts. Inequality among states. The NPT has been criticized for creating a divide between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. Non-nuclear weapon states argue that the treaty perpetuates a hierarchy where certain countries are privileged to possess nuclear weapons while others are not. Lack of enforcement mechanisms. The NPT lacks strong enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance and address violations. This has limited its effectiveness in deterring non-compliance and holding violators accountable. Quotes of experts. AMB. Rakesh Sood. NPT has reached the limits of its success, citing RHE absence of a fixed timeline for achieving nuclear disarmament. Additionally, he points out that the treaty does not effectively stigmatize possession of nuclear weapons but rather focuses on the accumulation of such weapons. He also contends that the NPT falls short in its commitment to disarmament as it permits the use of nuclear technology for civilian purposes, which some view as not being a wholehearted attempt to eliminate nuclear weapons. Beatrice Film, Executive Director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. The NPT is a flawed treaty that has failed to deliver on its promise of disarmament. It has entrenched the status quo of nuclear haves and have-nots. Hans Blix, former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. The NPT's non-proliferation regime is outdated and ineffective. It has not prevented the proliferation of nuclear weapons as seen in the cases of North Korea and Iran. Comprehensive Nuclear Test and Treaty, CBT. Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CBT, is a multilateral treaty to ban nuclear weapons test explosions and any other nuclear explosions for both civilian and military purposes in all environments. It was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on September 10, 1996 but has not entered into force as 8 specific nations have not ratified the treaty. Shunya's obligations. Each slave party undertakes not to carry out any nuclear weapon test explosion or any other nuclear explosion and to prohibit and prevent any such nuclear explosion at any place under its jurisdiction or control. Each state party undertakes, furthermore, to refrain from causing, encouraging, or in any way participating in the carrying out of any nuclear weapon test explosion or any other nuclear explosion. Status. The treaty was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on September 10, 1996. It opened for signature in New York on September 24, 1996 when it was signed by 71 states, including 5 of the 8 then nuclear-capable states. As of January 2023, 177 states have ratified the CBT and another 9 states have signed but not ratified it. Kev highlights of CBT. Ban on nuclear testing. The CBT prohibits all forms of nuclear explosions, including those for military and civilian purposes. It aims to put an end to the testing of nuclear weapons worldwide. Comprehensive Verification Regime. The treaty establishes a comprehensive verification regime to monitor compliance with the ban. It includes a global network of monitoring stations that detect and analyze various types of data such as seismic, hydroacoustic, infrasound, and radionuclide to ensure that no nuclear tests take place. Entry into force requirement. The CBT requires ratification by 44 specific countries listed in Annex 2 of the treaty, including countries with nuclear capabilities for it to enter into force. These countries must ratify the treaty for it to have full legal effect. Non-proliferation and disarmament. The CBT contributes to non-proliferation efforts by hindering the development and improvement of nuclear weapons technology. It strengthens Tier norm against nuclear testing and supports global disarmament initiatives. International cooperation. The treaty promotes international cooperation in areas related to nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. It encourages states to share data, collaborate on monitoring activities, and exchange information to ensure treaty compliance. Support for the CBTO. CBT establishes the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, CBTO, to implement Tier Treaty's provisions. The CBTO is responsible for maintaining Tier verification system, conducting inspections, and facilitating international cooperation on nuclear test monitoring. WHV. India has not joined CBT. Complex issue. India's principled opposition drew from its emphasis on universal and complete nuclear disarmament in a time-bound manner. India has traditionally believed this to be the end goal, with the test ban just being a path to get there. But it did not insist on a complete disarmament clause in 1994, acknowledging that it was a complex issue. Verification and monitoring concerns. India has raised concerns about the verification and monitoring mechanisms of the CBT. It believes that the current monitoring system may not be able to detect covert or low-yield nuclear tests with absolute certainty. India has called for further development and refinement of the treaty's verification regime to address these concerns. Computerized testing. The advent of computerized testing has raised some questions about the relevance of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test and Treaty, CBT. Critics argue that advancements in computer simulations and virtual testing have made physical nuclear testing unnecessary for weapon development and verification purposes. They claim that these technological capabilities undermine the need for a treaty that prohibits nuclear testing altogether. Challenge to India's nuclear program would hinder India's strategic nuclear program development for energy needs given its growing population and requirement of clean energy. Nuclear Suppliers Group and India. The Nuclear Suppliers Group (NSG) is a multilateral export control regime consisting of 48 participating countries. The NSG was established in 1974 in response to India's first nuclear weapons test, known as Smiling Buddha, which demonstrated its nuclear capabilities. The primary objective of the NSG at its inception was to respond to nuclear proliferation challenges and strengthen non-proliferation efforts worldwide. The NSG guidelines govern IHC transfer of nuclear items and technologies, including nuclear. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B Shunya IAS. Reactors, fuel, and other sensitive nuclear materials. Major objectives of NSG. The NSG aims to ensure that nuclear exports are carried out with appropriate safeguards, physical protection and non-proliferation conditions and other appropriate restraints. The NSG also seeks to restrict the export of sensitive items that can contribute to the proliferation of nuclear weapons. India's case for joining. Integration into global nuclear governance. Joining the NSG would provide India with a seat at the table in shaping global nuclear norms, regulations, and export controls. It would allow India to participate in decision-making processes regarding nuclear commerce and contribute its expertise to non-proliferation efforts. India's nuclear commitments. Joining the NSG would further demonstrate India's commitment to nuclear non-proliferation and strengthen its standing as a responsible nuclear power. Energy security and climate change. Joining the NSG will give India better access to low-cost, clean energy important for its economic growth. It will let India cut its emissions and bring down air pollution from coal-fired power plants. India's thorium export. NSG membership would put India on an unyielding footing to propose the idea of plutonium trade for its thorium program that has been holding back in the wings. Access to technology. It would facilitate India's access to high technology for economic development and permit Indian companies to enter joint ventures in the area of high-tech manufacturing. Main challenge to India's membership. Non-signatory to NPT. Since India has not yet signed on any of the major non-proliferation treaties, particularly the NPT, therefore, technically India faces a host of challenges ranging from questions about its credibility. Chinese opposition. China, which has vetoed India's membership. The reason for which China has been vetoing India's entry into the NSG is the issue of Pakistan's entry. China wants that if India is allowed in the NSG, then Pakistan should also have access to the same. WHV. Does India not need to join NSG? Nuclear cooperation agreements. India has already entered into bilateral nuclear cooperation agreements with several countries, including the United States, France, Russia, and Australia. These agreements allow for nuclear trade, technology transfer, and collaboration in areas such as civil nuclear energy, research, and development. India believes that these bilateral agreements are sufficient to meet its nuclear requirements. Non-proliferation credentials. India asserts that it has a robust non-proliferation record and has implemented effective export controls and safeguards to prevent the proliferation of nuclear technology or materials. It argues that its non-proliferation commitments and actions are on par with NSG guidelines, even though it is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. NSG's ineffectiveness. Critics of the NSG argue that the group has been ineffective in curbing nuclear proliferation. They argue that countries like North Korea and Pakistan, which have not adhered to non-proliferation norms, were able to acquire nuclear weapons despite being outside the NSG framework. Therefore, India questions the effectiveness and relevance of the NSG in addressing global proliferation challenges. India's nuclear doctrine. Credit i.e. minimum deterrence. Pillow op 1**5 nuclear doctrine. A slash or vucal ru slash ec pons. Stores I. M. XSS E redo J T. Shunya IAS. Indian's Nuclear Doctrine 2003. 1. India's nuclear doctrine can be summarized as follows. Building and maintaining a credible minimum deterrence, a posture of no first-use. Nuclear weapons will only be used in retaliation against a nuclear attack on Indian territory or on Indian forces anywhere. Nuclear retaliation to a first strike will be massive and designed to inflict unacceptable damage. Nuclear retaliatory attacks can only be authorized by the civilian political leadership through the Nuclear Command Authority. Non-use of nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states, however, in the event of a major attack against India or Indian forces anywhere by biological or chemical weapons, India will retain the option of retaliating with nuclear weapons, a continuance of strict controls on the export of nuclear and missile-related materials and technologies, participation in the fissile material cutoff TGKD negotiations, and continued observance of the moratorium on nuclear tests. Continued commitment to the goal of a nuclear weapon-free world through global, verifiable, and non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament. 2. The Nuclear Command Authority comprises a political council and an executive council. The political council is chaired by the Prime Minister. It is the sole body which can authorize the use of nuclear weapons. 3. The National Security Advisor chairs the Executive Council. It provides inputs for decision-making by the Nuclear Command Authority and executes the directives given to it by the Political Council. 4. The Cabinet Committee on Security, CCS, reviewed the existing command and control structures, the state of readiness, the targeting strategy for a retaliatory attack, and operating procedures for various stages of alert and launch. The committee expressed satisfaction with the overall preparedness. The Cabinet Committee on Security, CCS, approved the appointment of a Commander-in-Chief, Strategic Forces Command, to manage and administer all strategic forces. 5. The CCS also reviewed and approved the arrangements for alternate chains of command for retaliatory nuclear strikes in all eventualities. No first-use policy / meaning, a so-called NFU pledge, first publicly made by China in 1964, refers to any authoritative statement by a nuclear weapon state to never be the first to use these weapons in a conflict, reserving them strictly to retaliate in the aftermath of a nuclear attack against its territory or military personnel. These pledges are a component of nuclear declaratory policies. India's case. India's no first-use (NFU) policy is a key pillar of India's nuclear doctrine. Under the NFU policy, India declares that it will not be the first to use nuclear weapons in any conflict. This policy signifies India's commitment to using nuclear weapons solely as a deterrent and not as an offensive tool. The NFU policy was first articulated by India in 1998 after it conducted its nuclear tests. It is a reflection of India's stance on nuclear weapons, emphasizing restraint and responsible behavior. The policy is intended to promote stability in the region and prevent the escalation of conflicts to the nuclear level. However, India's NFU policy does come with some caveats. It states that the use of nuclear weapons by India would be contingent upon a nuclear attack on its territory or on its forces anywhere. This means that India reserves the right to retaliate with nuclear weapons in response to a nuclear attack. The NFU policy is aimed at maintaining strategic stability and avoiding the risk of accidental or unintended nuclear escalation. It is seen as a confidence-building measure and a demonstration of India's commitment to global disarmament efforts. India's NFU policy has been reaffirmed by successive governments, highlighting its importance in India's nuclear posture. Criticism of NFU. Ambiguity and lack of clarity. India's NFU policy lacks clarity and is intentionally ambiguous, leaving room for interpretation and potential miscalculations. Critics argue that the policy does not clearly define the specific Shunya IAS. Strategic vulnerability. India's NFU policy exposes the country to strategic vulnerabilities, particularly in the face of potential surprise nuclear attacks or changing security dynamics. Changing security environment. India's NFU policy needs to be reevaluated in light of the evolving security environment and emerging nuclear doctrines of other countries. Critics argue that regional dynamics and the development of new nuclear strategies by other states may require a reassessment of India's stance on NFU. Lack of flexibility. India's rigid adherence to the NFU policy limits its strategic options and hampers its ability to respond effectively to emerging threats. Credibility and deterrence. The credibility of India's NFU policy is questionable, as adversaries may doubt India's commitment to refrain from first use in a conflict scenario. It may be seen that the policy may not effectively deter potential nuclear threats due to doubts about India's willingness to adhere to it. Recent challenges to maintaining the no first use policy. With the adversarial nature of relations with China and Pakistan in recent years, India's security equations have changed tremendously in the neighborhood. Due to this, critics have questioned the relevancy of maintaining a no first use policy, especially as it puts the entire Indian population under the threat of a first use. Thus, there is an ongoing debate with respect to maintaining the stance or removing it altogether. Preemptive preparedness. Experts believe that should India and Pakistan go to war, India would ready its nuclear force for preemptive strikes. Moreover, having already been granted recognition of its right to a nuclear program through the 2005 Indo-US nuclear deal, New Delhi has less incentive for caution. Deterring Chinese aggression. China and India are embroiled in military scuffling in the Western Himalayas, where the Chinese army has sliced off significant chunks of Indian territory. Given the disparity between New Delhi's conventional military power and Beijing's, publicly adopting a first-use doctrine would communicate both power and resolve on India's part. Higher cost of conventional deterrence. New Delhi has opted for a conventional buildup along the border with China. But that has put enormous strain on its under-equipped and overstretched armed forces as well as its underperforming economy. Diplomatically, too, building up conventional deterrence has been costly. Quotes by experts on NFU of India against C. Rajamohan. In his book Crossing the Rubicon, he says that India's nuclear doctrine shows India's nuclear abhorrence. Bharat Karnad. NFU may be useful as political rhetoric, but it is a liability in serious war planning. It requires India to first absorb a nuclear attack before responding in kind. Lt. Gen. B.S. Nagai. He says that there is a point in accepting so much damage in die first place. NFU puts the population under huge threat and thus calls NFU a formula for disaster. 4. Mamprasad Sethi. No need for expensive nuclear infrastructure and the onus of escalation is on the adversary. This also makes a no need to keep nuclear forces on trigger. Navy Chief Arun Prakash, NFU was adopted not merely as a token of nuclear restraint and responsible conduct on India's part, but also because it is, by far, the least burdensome and inexpensive form of nuclear deterrence. Points in favor of maintaining NFU. First, conventional and nuclear forces readiness does not have to be maintained, so forces and equipment can be. In a relaxed posture, nuclear forces can be maintained in a demated condition, waiting for orders from higher echelons to go to a higher alert status, thus ensuring that command and control stay firmly with the civilian political leadership. Since there is a no first-use alert requirement, the chances of reacting to a false alarm are nullified. Third, the onus of taking the decision to escalate to nuclear use lies on the adversary and not on the party having an NFU doctrine. Fourth, a first use would result in international opprobrium and weigh heavily on a country with a first-use posture. Fifth, a first-use posture still requires a country to have survivable second strike capability, as there is nothing. Shunya IAS. India's NFU policy has been a source of reassurance and stability in South Asia, helping to prevent an escalation of tensions and providing a foundation for diplomatic negotiations. Ambassador Sarah Williams, Diplomatic Relations Specialist. Credible minimum deterrence. Credible minimum deterrence is composite posturing adopted by some nuclear-armed states, especially India and Pakistan, to convey a non-aggressive and defensive nuclear posture by projecting a nuclear arsenal that fulfills the bare needs of defense and security. Accordingly, it implies that the nuclear arsenals will be minimal enough to provide credible deterrence against adversaries. While minimum, the number of warheads and delivery systems at a given point of time can be dynamically driven by strategic environment, perceived strength, or buildup of rival arsenals. The question of credibility is based on perceptions, whether the adversary has been effectively deterred or whether the capability to impart unacceptable damage has been convincingly conveyed to the adversary. India and Pakistan have both seen their deterrence goalposts being constantly shifted as a result of their mutual security dilemmas, as also the strategic modernization pursued by China. K. Subramaniani, according to him, credibility is a function of how well command and control functions, and the essence of deterrence is to have a command and control chain from the political level to the implementing level that demonstrates its survivability under the worst conditions of decapitation attack. Dr. Rajan Gupta, nuclear policy analyst. Credible minimum deterrence is about maintaining a nuclear arsenal that is adequate to deter potential adversaries, ensuring the security and sovereignty of the nation without engaging in an unnecessary arms race. Advantages of CMP. Enhanced national security. Credible minimum deterrence is believed to enhance a nation's national security by ensuring that potential adversaries are deterred from launching a nuclear attack due to the credible threat of retaliation. Reduced risk of nuclear escalation by maintaining a modest and survivable nuclear arsenal. Credible minimum deterrence aims to prevent escalation of a nuclear conflict, thereby reducing the risk of catastrophic consequences. Cost-effectiveness. Adopting a policy of credible minimum deterrence allows a country to focus its resources on other vital sectors such as economic development, healthcare, education, and infrastructure rather than engaging in an expensive arms race. Non-provocative posture. Credible minimum deterrence promotes a non-provocative posture, emphasizing defensive rather than offensive capabilities. This can contribute to regional stability and reduce the likelihood of a preemptive strike by potential adversaries. Global peace and stability. The maintenance of a credible minimum deterrence posture can contribute to global peace and stability by discouraging the proliferation of nuclear weapons and promoting responsible behavior among nuclear-armed states. Scholar S. View. C. Rajamenon, a mismatch of nuclear doctrine. Pakistanis developing tactic weapons and asymmetric response. As deterrence optimists, moderates are generally less concerned about the quantity or quality of nuclear weapons. Subrahmanyam wrote that what matters is not so much the exchange ratio of damage suffered by both sides, but how much punishment an adversary calculates that it can accept. Criticism. Limited effectiveness. Some argue that command may not be effective against non-nuclear threats or emerging unconventional threats such as cyber warfare or asymmetric attacks. It is criticized for focusing solely on nuclear capabilities without addressing evolving security challenges. Shunya IAS. Psychological and perception battle. Deterrence is described as a psychological and perception battle rather than a physical competition, thus a rival nation may not be convinced of the deterrence and thus CMD will fail to deter any possible strike. Minimum capability. The concept of minimum deterrence refers to the minimum capability that the target entity B must possess in order to retaliate and cause unacceptable damage to the aggressor entity A even after a full force attack. This minimum capability is considered during capability development and resource allocation. Scholars' criticism. Bharat Karnad disagrees with the very notion of minimum nuclear deterrence, which he calls a real military liability. Kamit visualizes a much grander role for nuclear weapons in India's rise as a great power. Satish Chandra has argued that maintaining the credibility of India's threat of unacceptable damage requires that the size of India's nuclear arsenal be a function of its threat perceptions, suggesting that size has to be open-ended and not fixed. Chandra had argued that, in light of long-standing China-Pakistan collusion, India should seek a capability sufficient to inflict unacceptable damage on both Pakistan and China. Jayant Prasad, we should change it to minimum credible deterrence. India's impact on global nuclear order. Non-proliferation norms. India's status as a non-nuclear non-proliferation treaty, NPT, nuclear-armed state challenged the established non-proliferation norms. It sparked debates about the fairness and effectiveness of the NPT, highlighting the need for inclusivity and addressing the concerns of non-NPT nuclear-armed states. Nuclear testing. India's nuclear tests in 1974 and 1998 had repercussions on the global nuclear order. These tests led to international condemnation and increased focus on non-proliferation efforts. They also triggered discussions on nuclear arms control and the need to prevent further proliferation. Nuclear safeguards. India's engagement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, and its adherence to IAEA safeguards agreements have influenced the global nuclear order. India's cooperation with the IAEA in implementing nuclear safeguards and its commitment to non-proliferation norms have helped strengthen the global nuclear non-proliferation regime. Civil nuclear cooperation. India's civil nuclear cooperation agreements with countries like the United States have reshaped the global nuclear order. The 2008 US-India Civil Nuclear Agreement, which granted India access to civilian nuclear technology and fuel, signaled a shift in international perceptions and recognition of India as a responsible nuclear power. Calls for disarmament. India has been vocal about the need for global nuclear disarmament. It has advocated for comprehensive disarmament and has emphasized the importance of nuclear weapon states taking concrete steps towards disarmament. India's stance has contributed to discussions and initiatives aimed at nuclear disarmament at the global level. Nuclear Suppliers Group, the NSG, was established as a response to the Indian nuclear test conducted in 1974. The aim of the NSG is to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons by controlling the export of nuclear-related materials and technologies. While the Indian test did contribute to the formation of the NSG, the primary motivation behind its establishment was to strengthen global non-proliferation efforts in general. Latest updates in India's nuclear policies. March 2024, in line with its commitment to expanding peaceful nuclear applications, India has made progress in its nuclear power program. Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently oversaw the commencement of core loading at India's first indigenous fast breeder reactor, FBR, at Kalpakkam. MIRV, a notable milestone is the successful testing of the multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle MIRV technology on the Agni-V ballistic missile. This technology allows a single missile to carry and deliver multiple nuclear warheads to different targets, enhancing India's strategic deterrence capabilities. Standard conclusions. In a neighborhood of strategic rivalry, India's nuclear capability serves as a reminder to all aggressors of India's resolve against any misadventure against its sovereignty. Although it is said that India's best security interests are served in a nuclear-free world, the current geopolitical tensions mandate India maintain a nuclear weapon as a credible deterrent. Unit 8 Recent Developments in Indian Foreign Policy. Previous year's questions. Russian-Ukraine crisis has cast a dark shadow on the energy needs of the member states of the European Union. 2022 Ukraine crisis is a product of power politics and geopolitics. Comment. 2014 Ukraine crisis. With Russian attacks now focused on the east of the country, the war in Ukraine has entered a new phase. Responses in the rest of the world range from hesitancy in Germany, fear in Taiwan of China doing something similar, and ambivalence in wider Asia. Story so far: AA with EU in President Viktor against signing in 2013 Ukraine then Yanukovych decided association agreement. Russia Kiev Romani A.N. Areas under martial law. Bella Rus. AA with the European Union EU sparking major pro-European protests in a cry. He was impeached by the Parliament. And Crimean annexation. In March 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, an autonomous peninsula in southern Ukraine with strong Russian loyalties, on the pretext that it was defending its interests and those of Russian-speaking ex-citizens. The EU, the United States, and other countries imposed sanctions on Rus. Shortly afterwards, pro-Russian separatists IB Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk regions declared their independence from Kiev, prompting months of heavy fighting. Minsk Protocol I. In 2014, a peace plan for eastern Ukraine, the Minsk Protocol I, was signed. However, the agreement quickly broke down, with violations by both sides. Its provisions included prisoner exchanges, deliveries of humanitarian aid, and the withdrawal of heavy weapons. Minsk N Agreement. Russia, Ukraine, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, and the leaders of two pro-Russian separatist regions signed a 13-point agreement in February. Minsk N Agreement. Russia, Ukraine, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, and the leaders of two pro-Russian separatist regions signed a 13-point agreement in February 2015 in Minsk. France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia, the Normandy Four, agreed to a new ceasefire for the implementation of the agreement. NTS. Recent updates, May 20th. 24. Kharkiv offensive. Russian forces have made significant territorial gains in Kharkiv Oblast, capturing 278 square kilometers, 107 square miles, between May 9th and May 15th. the largest gain since December 2nd. 2022. However, Ukrainian forces are actively working to counter these advances. Buffer zone strategy. Russia is attempting to create a buffer zone to protect Belgorod city from Ukraine. In strike. This involves seizing territory in the northern Kharkiv region, with current offensives aimed at expanding control along the border area peace negotiations. Zelensky has invited China to participate in a peace summit in Switzerland, Russian President Vladimir Putin remains critical of the peace conference, advocating for terms based on earlier negotiations in Istanbul. Shunya IAS. Ukraine. Ukrainian forces continue to mount strong defenses and counteroffensives, especially in the eastern regions. They have managed to halt some of the Russian advances and are preparing for more robust counteroffensive operations once they receive additional military aid from Western allies. Reasons for the war. Political. NATO membership. For Russia, Ukraine should not join NATO as a member. But it is essential for Ukraine's national security policy, especially after the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014. Marginalization of Russian identity. In 2019, Ukrainian language was made mandatory for public sector workers with a special status. Russian language was not included in exceptions for minority languages. Failure of international institutions. UN was made after World War II to keep a check so that there would be no third WW. While its failure of international organizations collectively to check tensions in the Eurasia region. Economic integration with EU. Ukraine wants to join the European Union, EU, for early integration of its political and economic relations with the EU, which Russia doesn't want Ukraine to do. Euromaidan movement. It was sparked by the Ukrainian government's decision to suspend the signing of an association agreement with the European Union, instead choosing closer ties to Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union. Eurasian Economic Community. Russia want Ukraine to join Eurasian Economic Community, AEC, which is a free trade agreement for post-Soviet states, so that Russia can control the resource-rich Ukraine. Geostrategic. Arm Weatherport. Ukraine's reunification with Russia solves the problem of the Black Sea Fleet, which Ukraine's new leaders vowed to shut down and for which there is no other basing location that does NC. Freeze in winter. Boost to Russian Navy. Russia retains strategic grip on the region and ability to project its naval power to the Mediterranean and beyond. Importance of ports in Black Sea. In the event of a war, the Russian Navy cannot get out to the Baltic Sea either. Because NATO controls Skagerrak Strait, which connects to the North Strait if Russia gets past the Skagerrak, the GI-UK gap, Greenland, Iceland, UK. In the North Sea will prevent its advance to the Atlantic. Limitations of global mechanisms. UNSC veto. The veto power of Russia has prevented and effectively paralyzed the UN from taking any action against aggressive Russia. Extreme brinkmanship. Russia's disregard for global action against it has also made things difficult as nothing has effectively worked in deterring Russia. Failure of multilateralism. The issue can also be seen due to the failure of US-led NATO in assuring Russians regarding their border insecurities. Precedent of Crimea. The Crimean annexation went without much impact on Russia and set the base for the current Ukraine annexation. Polarized view. The issue of the invasion has also seen different opinions where many nations have blamed NATO and its expansion for the issue, thus polarizing the debate. Russian energy exports. Russian oil and gas exports, especially to Europe, have been Russia's bargaining chip. And too many economic sanctions can cause an energy crisis in Europe. Response from world nations. 1. Europe and US. No boots-on-ground support, with Ukraine yet to become a NATO member. The response from the US and the European allies is driven by sanctions against Russia and providing military hardware, cash, and diplomatic support to Ukraine. Sanctions. Resolutions against Russia at the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, UN Security Council, UNSC, International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, etc. Use of sanctions and diplomacy to put pressure on others, including India. Energy dependency. Europe, especially Germany and France, are still dependent on natural gas from Russia, without which these nations cannot survive winter. Hence, they cannot stop gas purchases from Russia. Effect of COVID-19. Putting sanctions on Russia affects the global economy and Europe in particular due to their energy needs. Europe doesn't want to take such a huge risk when its economy is already shattered due to the lockdowns during the pandemic. Russia-China axis. Cornering Russia beyond a limit will make it dependent on China, and China can exploit the situation against the West. 2. Chinese. Justified Russia. China rejected calling Russia's moves on Ukraine an invasion and urged all sides to exercise restraint. Abstention. China abstained on a US-sponsored UNSC resolution that deplores in the strongest terms Russia's aggression against Ukraine, along with the United Arab Emirates, UAE. 3. India. Independent response. India has maintained an independent response based on its national interest and principles, rather than pressure from any nation. India abstained from voting in all resolutions. India's principles. These principles work towards a safe and sustainable solution based on international norms and principles. Immediate cessation of violence and hostilities, return to the path of dialogue and diplomacy. Global order is anchored on law, UN Charter, and respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states. Humanitarian access to a conflict situation. Humanitarian assistance touch with leadership of both Russia and Ukraine. Humanitarian assistance. It does not vilify any side but provides humanitarian relief and assistance to people rather than arms to them. Example. India sent 90 tons of humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Strategic autonomy. It highlights strategic autonomy in times of a global upheaval and to reach a peaceful resolution through shared responsibility. Analysis of India's strategic autonomy. India's strategic autonomy in the context of Ukraine refers to its independent decision-making and neutrality in the conflict, based on its own national interests and priorities. Maintaining relations with Russia. The primary strategic benefits of its relationship with Russia were to keep Moscow neutral when New Delhi and Beijing clashed, and an inexpensive military supply chain. Highlights India's strategic reasons for maintaining its relationship with Russia and staying neutral in the Ukraine conflict. Making US and the West understand India's own geopolitical threats. India required the US, its primary partner in a larger strategic response to China, to accept its neutrality. Demonstrates India's need for the US to understand and accept its position on Ukraine, given their partnership in countering China. Maintaining its energy security. India began buying discounted Russian oil and fertilizer to mitigate the social and economic damages. Shows how India utilized economic measures, such as purchasing discounted Russian oil and fertilizer to address the economic challenges caused by the Ukraine war. Geopolitical implications assessment. India assessed the geopolitical implications of the war, including Russia's relationship with China and the response of oilier nations such as the United States and European countries. This evaluation demonstrated India's independent analysis and decision-making process in determining its own strategic interests and partnerships. Shunya IAS. Encouraging the West to also identify China as a common threat. India will observe whether Germany and other European nations rebuild their military capabilities and begin treating China as a strategic threat because of the Ukraine war. Highlights India's interest in how European nations respond to the Ukraine war and whether they consider China as a strategic threat. Engagement in diplomatic efforts. India actively engaged in diplomatic efforts to help bring the war to a close by privately and later publicly pressing Russia to consider negotiations with Ukraine. This proactive approach highlighted India's independent diplomatic engagement and its willingness to contribute to conflict resolution efforts. These efforts also highlight how India's interests are best served in a climate of peace between Russia, its longtime defense partner, and the West, its new markets and closer allies. Effects on India 1. Effects on India 1. Diplomatic. To maintain balance between Russia and US, India's position on the ongoing Ukraine crisis undergirded by the desire to keep clear of the crosshairs of big power rivalry is reminiscent of its quintessential strategic autonomy. Emerging differences but shadows of ongoing Ukraine crisis loom large over its relationship with Western world because of differing perceptions. E.g. India versus EU and UK. EU and UK have cordial relationship with India with ongoing trade, climate change and Indo-Pacific as areas of common interest. But expectation gaps have increased because of different perspectives on the Ukraine crisis. India USA wants to nudge India away from Russia and shift towards the USA on major areas such as defense and oil. 2. Military. Historical dependence. Over the past 2 decades, Russia has supplied around 65% of India's total arms imports, which amounted to more than $60 billion. This includes major platforms such as Sukhoi and MiG fighter jets, T-90 tanks, and various missile systems. Arms trade with Russia. Russia remains the major arms supplier of India, but the war has once again increased U.S. threats of application of COTSA. As per SIPRI data, Russia contributed 46% of India's total arms imports in 2017 to 21, 69% in 2012 to 16. S-400 delivery and U.S. waiver. The crisis comes precisely as India's purchase of the Russian S-400 missile system is underway and India hopes for a waiver of U.S. sanctions on this. Conflict will complicate both the delivery of the system and the possibility of a presidential waiver. 3. Strategic. World war scenario. Any conflict where the U.S. and its European allies are ranged against Russia will impact the whole world economically and in terms of security, and India, as a partner to both Moscow and Washington, will either have to take sides or be prepared to deal with unhappiness from both sides. Moves focus from China, just as US and Europe had grown more focused on their Indo-Pacific strategy. That puts India center stage, and India grapples with Chinese aggression and land grab at the line of actual control and 100,000 troops along the boundary on both sides. The world's attention is diverted from China to Russia. Brings Russia-China closer, the crisis will make Moscow more dependent on friends like China and build a regional bloc of sorts that India is not a part of. Russia is already averse to the Indo-Pacific concept and the Quad as a revival of Cold War bloc politics and views them as being against its Asia-Pacific interests. 4. Economic. India's investment in Russia. India's plans in Russia's energy sector and in the development of its Far East, in general, would become problematic, especially by the reluctance of the private sector to fall afoul of the complex U.S. sanctions. Example, the new sanctions could exclude Russia from the SWIFT payments system. Gas prices have increased over 50% this year after a 5-fold rise last year. This price rise. Sunya's. Oil prices. Sanctions on Russia have pushed oil prices to above USS low/barrel. With India being the third largest oil importer after China and USA, every $1 price rise increases India's import bill by 10,700 crore on an annualized basis. Agriculture. The conflict has opened new opportunities for India in wheat export, and on the other hand, it has caused hardships over fertilizer availability and sunflower oil, as Ukraine accounts for 1.4 metric tons of India's imports out of total 1.9 metric tons import every year. Metals. Russia is a major producer of titanium, palladium, scandium, rough diamond, etc. Due to war and sanctions, it will have a negative impact on India's diamond industry, reduced imports, and supply chain issues for semiconductor industry, automobile companies, etc. Flight of capital. Foreign portfolio investors have been selling their holdings in Indian equities over the last 4 months. This outflow is likely to continue over the coming days. As FPLs pulled out, domestic institutions emerged as net investors. Export concerns. Russia and Ukraine are major export destinations of the Indian pharmaceutical industry. Also, Russia accounts for 18% of Indian tea exports. Global challenges. 1. Diplomatic. Deteriorating relations with USA. The conflict in Ukraine risks further deterioration of US-Russia relations and greater escalation if Russia expands its presence in Ukraine or into NATO countries. Shift NATO focus to Europe again. An escalating crisis in Ukraine threatens to upend recent efforts by the United States and NATO to shift alliance's attention to the security challenge posed by China and would push it back toward its traditional role of protecting Europe and, by extension, North America. Global peace. The conflict has heightened tensions in Russia's relations with both the United States and Europe, complicating the prospects for cooperation elsewhere, including on issues of terrorism, arms control, and a political solution in Syria. Imposed sanctions. The West imposed sanctions on Russia after the seizure of Crimea and could add painful new measures such as preventing it from pumping Russian gas through the newly built Nord Stream 2 pipeline to Germany. 2. Economic. Energy crisis. In any conflict, Europe worries Russia will turn down gas and oil supplies, driving energy price up. Oil surge. Brent crude surged past $04 a barrel in the wake of the fresh sanctions on Russia, one of the top global producers of oil, gas, metals, and agricultural products. Agriculture. Russia and Ukraine are major global suppliers of some commodities. See image. Also, Russia accounts for 15% of global nitrogenous fertilizer trade and 17% of global potash fertilizer trade. Stock market crisis. Reacting to the plans announced by the US and EU nations to sanction Moscow's central bank and cut off some financial institutions from the SWIFT messaging system, Russia's central bank ordered professional stock market participants to suspend the execution of all orders by foreign legal entities and individuals to sell Russian securities. Bank run. The US, EU, United Kingdom, and Canada had announced that the assets of Russia's central bank will be frozen, which would make it difficult for it to sell them overseas to support its own banks and companies. Consumer goods shortage. The impact of some of these measures would clearly end up hurting middle class Russians, given that the country remains highly dependent on the West for many of its consumer goods. Shortages of essential metals. The price of palladium used in automotive exhaust systems and mobile phones has been soaring amid fears that Russia, the world's largest exporter of the metal, could be cut off from global markets. Financial turmoil. Global banks are bracing for the effects of sanctions designed to restrict Russia's access to foreign capital and limit its ability to process payments in dollars, euros, and other currencies crucial for trade. PSIR optional paper 2-part *B. Shunya ISM Mem M7XJ. Refugee crisis, migration and displacement. The war has resulted in significant human displacement. Over 14.6 million people, around 40% of Ukraine's population, are expected to need humanitarian aid in 2024. 3. Regional challenges. Europe, relations likely to expand towards Africa and Asia-Pacific to diminish its dependence on Russia for oil and other commodities. Caucasus and Central Asia, close neighbors of Russia-Ukraine, it will enhance trade difficulties for them. Example, 5 Central Asian countries are landlocked and freely floating naval mines are reported from Black Sea maritime access to the Caucasus. Western Hemisphere, facing high inflation pressure, higher oil prices can cause instability in the Central American and Caribbean region. The exporters of oil, metals, and agriculture products like Brazil, Chile, etc. might mitigate the impact. Sub-Saharan Africa, already in hard phase of minimum policy space due to pandemic, the dependence on wheat imports from Russia or Ukraine will intensify socio-economic pressures. Middle East and North Africa, the rising food prices will give rise to food insecurities with risks of political instability similar to the Arab Spring. Example, Egypt imports 80% of its wheat from Ukraine. Indo-Pacific, the growing Chinese aggression, e.g., Taiwan, makes the region vulnerable to unilateral changes to the status quo with force. Impact of the war on Europe's energy policies. Preparation for supply disruptions. The European Union, EU, started preparing for potential supply disruptions from Russia in 2009 when a gas cut-off to Ukraine affected gas supplies to EU member state Bulgaria. This led to the development of EU energy plans, strategics, and unions to address energy security concerns. EU energy policies, natural gas and oil prices. The invasion led to a sharp increase in energy prices. In the immediate aftermath, oil prices rose by 40%, coal by 130%, and gas by 180%. Although gas prices have since moderated, they remain 11% lower than before the invasion due to reduced demand and increased liquefied natural gas (LNG) imports from other regions. Linking energy grids. Connecting energy grids played a crucial role. For example, the Greece-Bulgaria gas pipeline interconnector opened in 2022, allowing Bulgaria to continue receiving gas from Azerbaijan through the Trans-Adriatic pipeline. Other countries, including Poland, Lithuania, and Germany, constructed liquefied natural gas (LNG) terminals to import gas from the United States and other sources. Balancing energy dependence. Prior to the war, the EU had a split approach to balancing energy dependence. Prior to the war, the EU had a split approach to energy dependence on Russia. Some countries, like Poland, prioritized reducing energy dependence, while others, like Germany, focused on maintaining a flow of cheap Russian gas. The war prompted EU leaders to reconsider the reliance on Russian gas. Repower EU strategy. In March 2022, the EU swiftly decided to ban most Russian fossil fuels from EU markets and replace them with renewable energy sources. The Repower EU strategy aimed to replace Russian fossil fuel imports with alternative and renewable sources while promoting energy savings. Energy savings. The European Commission called for a 15% reduction in energy usage across EU member states. This led to various measures, including adjusting heating temperatures in buildings, reducing shower time, implementing speed limits, and incentivizing the installation of electric heat pumps. Capping prices. European governments implemented measures to insulate households and companies from surging fossil fuel prices. This included price caps, subsidies, windfall taxes on energy companies, and agreements with G7 countries to cap prices of Russian crude oil. Energy transition. The war has accelerated Europe's shift away from Russian energy. Countries like Germany have increased coal-fired power generation and are investing in LNG terminals to diversify energy imports. Nuclear power is also gaining renewed attention as a reliable energy source, accelerating the green transition. The war accelerated the EU's green energy transition. The Repower EU strategy aimed to more than double the share of renewable energy to 45% by 2030, primarily through wind and solar. It also called for increased investment in hydrogen, biomethane, and other renewable sources. Resurgent coal and nuclear. In the short term, Europe's transition away from Russian fossil fuels may require increased use of coal and nuclear energy. Germany delayed its exit from nuclear energy, and Poland deregulated its coal industry to compensate for the ban on Russian coke. Shunya IAG. Wave forward. Handle financial volatility from inflation, mounting trade costs and disruption by reconfiguring the complex global supply chain for sustainable development. Overcome social impacts by improving overall prosperity to emerge as a stronger geopolitical actor. Reduction of its dependence on other nations for its defense and critical supply needs, i.e., taking forward the idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Work towards the end of Cold War mentality by engaging with all major stakeholders on multiple forums. And making efforts to strengthen global institutions. Building upon the UN Charter, international law, and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity to ensure a common and sustainable legal order. Factors shaping the future of the crisis. Outside support for Ukraine. The success of Ukraine's war effort depends on outside aid, since Ukraine lacks the indigenous capacity to arm itself. Western countries, such as NATO members, have stepped up to provide weapons systems and support, but maintaining sustained aid and commitment is crucial. Resilience of the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian population has shown resilience and determination in the face of a brutal enemy. Despite suffering casualties and displacement, Ukrainians continue to fight for their country. Efforts to support their resilience include providing humanitarian assistance, work programs for refugees, education for children, and mental health support. Cohesion in the Russian military. The Russian military has faced challenges such as faulty equipment, lack of winter gear, and reported internal conflicts. The combination of battlefield losses, growing crises at home, income inequality, and societal cleavage can undermine military cohesion. Conditions exist for potential mutinies or protests within the Russian military, which could impact Russia's military performance. Nuclear threats. Russian President Vladimir Putin has relied on nuclear threats as a coercive tactic and deterrent against NATO intervention. The possibility of tactical nuclear weapons use in key strategic regions, such as Kherson, raises significant concerns. Efforts to deter the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine require international cooperation, risk reduction measures, and crisis communication channels. Endgame scenarios. The war is unlikely to be resolved through a genuine compromise or negotiated peace agreement. The most probable outcome is one side collapsing in exhaustion, leading to a temporary ceasefire but setting the stage for future conflict. The collapse could be driven by factors such as outside support for Ukraine, Ukrainian resilience, internal strains in Russia, and a united front against nuclear threats. Quotes. Pramit Pal Chaudhary. The primary strategic benefits of its relationship with Russia were to keep Moscow neutral when New Delhi and Beijing clashed, and an inexpensive military supply chain. Yes. Jaishankar, we are often asked whose side we are on. And our answer each time is straight and honest. India is on the side of peace and will remain firmly there. MEA. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine must be respected. Any unilateral actions that undermine these principles are of great concern to us. Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. The conflict underscores the importance of finding a diplomatic solution and addressing the underlying grievances and aspirations of the people in Ukraine, while also addressing Russia's security concerns. Brookings Institute. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has far-reaching implications for regional stability, the balance of power in Europe, and the future of international norms and principles governing state behavior. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B Shunya IAS. Afghanistan. Previous year's questions. To what extent is India's policy in regard to Afghanistan dictated by a vision of global South, rather than compulsion? 2009, Afghanistan is a litmus test for India's ascendance as a regional and global power. Discuss. 2014. Do you think that India's capacity-building role in Afghanistan has shrunk the strategic space for Pakistan there? Discuss. 2018. The war in Afghanistan is crucial from the point of view of India's national security. If the Americans withdraw and jihadis emerge with a sense of triumphalism, India will face increasing onslaught of terrorism. Comment. 2020. How does the recent takeover of Afghanistan by Taliban impact India's strategic interests? 150 words. 2021. What steps has India taken to regain its foothold in Afghanistan since the Taliban has taken over the country in August 2021? 2023. In August 2021, the Taliban swiftly captured major cities in Afghanistan, culminating in the takeover of Kabul, the capital. The Afghan government and security forces collapsed, leading to President Ashraf Ghani's departure from the country. Return of Taliban rule. The Taliban, an Islamist extremist group, previously ruled Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. Their return to power raised concerns about the status of human rights, women's rights, freedom of expression, and minority rights in the country. Aspects of India-Afghanistan relations. Historical and cultural links. India and Afghanistan share a strong relationship based on historical and cultural ties. Strategic Partnership Agreement. A strategic partnership agreement was signed between India and Afghanistan in 2011, solidifying their cooperation. India's policy objectives. India's policy towards Afghanistan aims to create a democratic, stable, and strong Afghanistan. India has been committed to the reconstruction and development of Afghanistan since the Ron Conference in 2001. Counterbalancing Pakistan. India's approach towards Afghanistan is influenced by the desire to prevent Pakistan from dominating Afghanistan and using it as a counterweight to India's influence in South Asia. India's ties with Afghanistan are also driven by its regional and global ambitions. India sees an opportunity to disrupt Pakistan's policy of strategic depth in Afghanistan and has prioritized engaging with nationalist Taliban factions. Developmental assistance. India has contributed $3 billion to Afghanistan's socio-economic development, making it the fifth highest contributor overall and the highest in the region. India's developmental assistance includes technical support to Afghan forces, duty-free access to the Indian market for Afghan exports, infrastructure projects like the Salma Dam and new parliament building, scholarships for Afghan students, and aid across all of Afghanistan's provinces. New development partnership. The Indian government has launched a new development partnership with Afghanistan, focusing on infrastructure development, capacity building, and human resources. Shunya IAS Happy Face MM. Investment and economic cooperation. Indian companies ARC investing in the mining sector in Afghanistan's Hajigak province. The India-Afghanistan Foundation has been established to enhance economic, educational, cultural, and technical cooperation. Cricket diplomacy. India has allotted 4 cricket grounds to the Afghanistan Cricket Board in India and is involved in building cricket stadiums in Afghanistan, promoting sports diplomacy. HI Impact Community Development Program. India undertakes small to medium-scale projects in education, water management, agriculture, and government buildings through the High-Impact Community Development Program. See COVID-19 support. During the COVID-19 pandemic, India exported wheat. See COVID-19 support. During the COVID-19 pandemic, India exported wheat, pulses, biscuits, as well as medical supplies such as HCQ, diagnostic kits, and PPEs to ensure food security and generate goodwill. Initiatives. India and Afghanistan are partners in regional connectivity initiatives such regional connectivity as the Turkmenistan-Afghanistan-Pakistan-India TAPI gas pipeline and the International North-South Transport Corridor INES-DC. Importance of Afghan peace to India. 1. Economic interests. Bilateral trade. Afghanistan is an important trade partner for India as trade crossed USS 1.5 billion 2019-20. India's share. India has a fair share in Afghan exports greater than 40.6%, which is a considerable amount. Regional donor. India is top regional donor to Afghanistan. India has executed many projects for the overall development for a peaceful Afghanistan. Energy security. TAPI gas pipeline, also known as Trans-Afghan Pipeline and Peace Pipeline, will transport natural gas. Mineral security. 7. Afghan's vast mineral wealth, Hajigak mines, will help India with the much-needed raw materials. Marker. Afghanistan is a sizable market for Indian exports. 2. National security. Extremism, ideological ties between extremist groups in India and in Afghanistan. Containment of Pakistan. Being a neighbor of Pakistan, it is important for India to engage with Afghanistan. Militancy, support. Afghan-based militants are often in close proximity to Kashmiri militants. 3. Strategic interests. Policy. The Strategic Partnership Agreement was signed in 2011 to enhance cooperation between both nations. Neighborhood first policy. Afghanistan is an important aspect for India's neighborhood policy and thus the peace process is in India's interests. Regional influence. Peace in the Afghan region ensures India's credibility as a regional partner. Regional partner. Afghanistan is currently an important partner for India in the region, especially against the Pakistan-based narrative on India. Access to Central Asia. A peaceful Afghanistan implies a better access for India into Central Asia through TAPI project, INES-DC and Ashgabat Agreement. Chabahar Port. The port plays a vital role for India's presence in the Gulf as well as in providing aid to Afghanistan through Iran. 4. Indian aid and projects. Salma Dam, reconstruction and also subsequent creation of irrigation facilities. Zaranj-Dilaram Road. Export of wheat to Afghanistan. Training for Afghan public servants. Construction of new parliament. Military support in form of vehicles and training. Children's hospital. Electricity substations and transmission lines. 5. Others. Health tourism. Afghans medical tourists in India get the best services and it in turn contributes to Indian GDP. Training Afghan cricket team. India is a home ground for training the Afghan cricket team. Scholarships. India has been providing scholarships to Afghan students for higher studies to enhance their human capital. Shunya IAS. India-Afghanistan relations under Taliban. The Taliban were groomed to be a valuable strategic asset for Pakistan's security establishment in its anti-India policies. But now that they are in control of Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban gain little from keeping India at bay, especially as the latter can provide much-needed financing for reconstruction and development. In other words, India-Taliban relations are, if not improving, at least becoming less overtly hostile in terms of both rhetoric and action. Restoring Kappa-to-Kappa links. The Taliban has expressed interest in restoring people-to-people links between India and Afghanistan. This indicates a desire to maintain and strengthen historical and cultural ties between the two countries. Acknowledging developmental aid. The Taliban has acknowledged the developmental aid provided by India. Over the past 2 decades, India has undertaken numerous infrastructure projects in Afghanistan, and the Taliban recognizes the positive impact of these projects on the Afghan people. Potential engagement in talks. The Taliban has signaled a willingness to engage in talks with India. While the nature and extent of these talks are yet to be determined, it shows a recognition of India's regional significance and a desire to establish diplomatic ties. Partial opening of embassy. India has cautiously engaged with the Taliban, reopening its embassy and sent only a technical team at the embassy without diplomatically recognizing the Taliban regime. Continued development projects. The Shahid Dam project, aimed at providing drinking water to 2 million residents of Kabul, is one example of an incomplete project that the Taliban may seek to engage with India on. This suggests a potential avenue for collaboration in the developmental and infrastructure sectors. Indian engagement with Taliban. The engagement with the Taliban through the online course raised questions about India's approach to a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan and the resumption of visa facilities for Afghan students stranded in their home country. F-R. Visa issue for Afghan students. India has delayed granting visas to Afghan students and revoked pre-existing visas due to security considerations. This has caused difficulties for Afghan students with financial struggles and limited access to education. India continues to maintain a technical team at its embassy in Kabul, reflecting its commitment to fostering regional stability and development in Afghanistan. The head of this technical team, Rambabu Chelappa, represented India at a regional conference organized by the Taliban in January 2024. During this conference, India emphasized its active participation in international and regional initiatives aimed at supporting Afghanistan's stability and development. Previous year's question: what steps has India taken to regain its foothold in Afghanistan since the Taliban has taken over the country in August 2021? 2023 F-15 marks. On August 15, 2021, Taliban entered Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan, and established control over the country. This marked the culmination of months of violence that unfolded after USA began withdrawing its troops from Afghanistan after 2 decades. Steps taken by India to regain foothold in Afghanistan since Taliban has taken over. 1. Economic. While not officially recognizing the Taliban regime, India has adopted a pragmatic approach, engaging in limited dialogue to protect its interests and ensure safety of its citizens. The budget 2022 to 2023 Indian government announced financial assistance of $27 million to Afghanistan. 2. Social. India, one of the oldest and strongest partners of Afghan people, has been forced to make hard choices. As a regional power, India has huge stakes in Afghanistan's peace and progress. For example, in the 4th Regional Security Dialogue, held in May 2022, India's NSA Ajit Doval pointed out that, unlike the West, the regional countries have no easy choice with regards to Afghanistan. 3. Political. India's meeting marked a significant shift in India's policy towards Taliban. For example, the Indian ambassador to Qatar held talks with the head of the Taliban's political office at the Indian embassy in Doha at the request of the Taliban. It was the first time an Indian diplomat formally met with the Taliban. 4. Humanitarian assistance. India continues humanitarian assistance efforts in Afghanistan, addressing critical needs amid challenging Taliban takeover. For example, India has supplied 47,500 metric tons wheat, medical aid including anti-TB medicines and other essential food items and COVID-19 vaccines, stationary items to school students of Habiba School. After the earthquake hit Afghanistan in June 2022, India proactively supplied 2 tons of relief assistance under the UN World Food Programme. Shunya IAS. 5. Ensuring security. India is working with regional partners to address potential tire cats emanating from Afghanistan, emphasizing the need for coordinated counterterrorism efforts. 6. Infra development. India continues to invest in the development of Afghanistan. For example, building Chabahar port in Iran, which provides an alternative trade route to Afghanistan bypassing Pakistan. But even as India recalibrates its policy, one dimension of this policy remains unchanged, i.e., eagerness to work with like-minded countries in the region and outside to bring peace and stability to Afghanistan. For example, in November 2021, New Delhi conducted the 3rd Regional Security Dialogue on Afghanistan, followed by India Central Asia Dialogue in December 2021 to find ways of helping the people of Afghanistan. Thus, India's strategy in Afghanistan is adaptive and pragmatic, focusing on safeguarding its interests while navigating the complex and evolving political landscape. Challenges for India in dealing with Taliban. Lack of Taliban engagement. India still does not have any formal channels to engage and negotiate with Taliban. China's influence in the region. China has been a traditional ally of Pakistan and both countries have close ties with the Taliban. The strengthening of the China-Pakistan-Taliban axis could undermine India's influence in Afghanistan and the broader region, as it may lead to increased coordination and collaboration against Indian interests. Terrorism and security concerns. India has faced security challenges from terrorist groups operating from Pakistani soil. The Taliban's close ties with Pakistan, including the safe haven they enjoyed there during their insurgency against Afghanistan, raise concerns that Pakistan and the Taliban may collaborate to support anti-India terrorists. Pakistan's strategic depth. Pakistan's support for the Taliban poses a threat to India's interests. The close ties between Pakistan's security establishment and the Taliban provide a safe haven and support base for anti-India militant groups operating in the region. This allows them to launch cross-border attacks and destabilize Indian-administered Kashmir. Pakistan's backing of the Taliban exacerbates tensions between India and Pakistan and hinders efforts to achieve peace and stability in the region. Taliban can be used to support Pakistan's sponsor terrorism in Kashmir. V of unclear future of Indian investments. Afghanistan is an important part of the Chabahar port project, which India and the Central Asian countries see as a game-changer for physical connectivity. New Delhi has invested $150 million in the 218 kilometers Zaranj-Dalaram highway, which connects Afghanistan to the Chabahar port via Millikenlaren. D to the power of a. Historical issues. India has had a conflictual past with dealing with Taliban, especially due to Taliban support to Pakistan during the hijacking of IC-814 in 1999. This resulted in Taliban also giving shelter to the terrorists released by India on ransom. Wave forward and quotes of scholars. Realist policy. Harsh V. Pant suggests that India should shift its focus from Kashmir to Afghanistan and work towards building a consensus among Delhi, Washington, and Moscow to ensure peace and stability in Afghanistan. Shamsaran proposes leveraging the USA's local network, good relations with tribes, and India's goodwill from developmental work to initiate a new great game. Continuation of soft power policy. Scholars like Rakesh Sood, Shiv Shankar Menon, and M.K. Badra. Kumar supports the continuation of India's soft power policy. They argue that India should maintain a no-boots-on-the-ground approach to avoid getting involved in the Afghan quagmire. However, this policy carries risks such as ceding strategic space to China and Pakistan and endangering India's investments in Afghanistan under Taliban rule. Smart power strategy. The smart power strategy suggests that India should pursue a proactive policy to safeguard its national interests. Shanti Marriott D'Souza emphasizes the need for India to engage with the new government in Afghanistan without compromising its image as a trustworthy neighbor. Vivek Kachu suggests maintaining quiet engagements with the Taliban to stay informed without conferring legitimacy on them or eroding India's own legitimacy. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B Shunya IAS. India-Israel. Previous year's questions. Identify the key sectors of cooperation between India and Israel since 2014. Examine their significance in strengthening the bilateral ties between the two countries. 2020. The growing closeness between India and Israel will strengthen the cause of Palestine. Comment. 2019. Has the recent Indus-Rakli relationships given a new dynamics to India's stand on Palestinian statehood? 2017. How does India-Israel bilateral ties reflect the autonomy of India's foreign policy choices? 2022. Bilateral data. 1. Economic relations. Bilateral trade. In the fiscal year 2022 to 23, the bilateral trade between India and Israel reached approximately $10.77 billion, excluding defense-related transactions. Indian exports to Israel were valued at $8.45 billion, while Israeli exports to India stood at $2.32 billion. The trade primarily includes diamonds, chemical products, electronic machinery, and high-tech products. Trade relations. Trade partner. India is Israel's third-largest trade partner in Asia and seventh-largest globally. Major component. Trade in diamonds constitutes about 50% of bilateral trade. Indian investments in Israel. Major Indian firms like TCS, State Bank of India, Sun Pharma, Infosys, and Tech Mahindra have established a presence in Israel through acquisitions and joint ventures. Notably, Adani Ports and I. Special Economic Zone Ltd. Acquired Haifa Port Company Ltd. for $1.18 billion. Israeli investments in India. Israel has invested in sectors like agriculture, water technology, and high-tech industries. There are over 300 Israeli companies operating in India, including Teva Pharmaceuticals and Netafim. FDI. Apart from direct investments, FDI from Israel to India also flows through USA, Europe, and Singapore. IT and services. During the last decade, Indian IT majors such as Infosys, Wipro, and Tech Mahindra have also made significant investments in Israel. 2. Strategic relations. Defense supplier. Israel is the third-largest supplier of defense items to India after Russia and the USAO supplies. The Indian Armed Forces have inducted a wide array of Israeli weapon systems over the years, which range from Falcon AWACS, airborne warning and control systems, and Heron, Searcher FL and Harop drones to Barak anti-missile defense systems and Spider quick-reaction anti-aircraft missile systems. Other. The acquisitions also include a host of Israeli missiles and precision-guided munitions, from Python and Derby air-to-air missiles to Crystal Maze and Spice 2000 bombs. At the 15th Joint Working Group, JWG 2021, meeting on bilateral defense cooperation, countries agreed to form a task force to formulate a comprehensive 10-year roadmap to identify new areas of cooperation. Defense FDI. India collaborated with Israeli defense companies under the new liberalized FDI regime in defense. Manufacturing. Also, India expressed interest in encouraging greater participation of Israeli defense companies in India's defense manufacturing sector. Middle East Quad. India and Israel have joined the minilateral along with USA and UAE known as the Middle East Quad. In 2014, India and Israel signed 3 important agreements: mutual legal assistance in criminal matters, cooperation in homeland and public security, and protection of classified material. Cooperation in homeland security. For working groups in the areas off-border management, internal security, and public safety. UNHRC abstention. India abstained from voting on resolution to probe Gaza bombing in May 2021. 3. Cultural/POPI couple. Tourism. Israelis know India for its culture and tradition, making it an attractive alternative tourist destination. In 2017, Indian tourists became the second largest from an Asian country. On February 2020, the first of its kind Jerusalem Mumbai Festival was held in Mumbai to promote artistic and cultural ties. Jews community in India. The majority is from Maharashtra, Bene Israelis, and relatively smaller numbers from Kerala. Kochini Jews, and Kolkata, Baghdadi Jews. Diaspora potential. Clear are approximately 85,000 Jews of Indian origin in Israel, with at least one Indian parent, who are all Israeli passport holders. Indian Jew migration. Some Indian Jews from Tlai northeastern states, Bnei Minashi, have been immigrating to Israel for science and technology. Area of cooperation. Specific areas of cooperation include IT, biotechnology, lasers, and electro-optics. I4RD Fund. In 2005, India and Israel signed an MOU to set up I4RD Fund to encourage bilateral investment into industrial research and development and specific projects. Israel-India Industrial R&D and Technological Innovation Fund, I4F First Grant, are companies in efficient water use, improving communications infrastructure, solar energy use, and life-changing surgeries. The fund aims to help Israeli entrepreneurs enter Tlai Indian market. Technical assistance in cleaning Ganga. Israel has also offered to assist with India's Clean Ganga mission by providing its expertise in water management to address water scarcity. Space collaboration. India and Israel signed a cooperative agreement promoting space collaboration in 2002. Since then, the Israel Space Agency, ISA, and the ISRO have collaborated on using satellites to improve land and other resources. India has successfully launched PSIR and RISAT, two radar imaging satellites of Israel from the PSLV of ISRO. Agricultural partnership and water conservation. Arid land technology, biotechnology, and a joint action plan to research India-specific and export-oriented seeds deserve attention. India is gaining Israel's expertise in managing and improving dairy fanning and high milk yield. Evolution of India-Israel relations. Establishment of diplomatic relations, 1950s, 1992 India recognized Israel as a sovereign state shortly after its independence in 1947. However, it was only in I-9-2 that full diplomatic relations were established between the two countries. During this period, India maintained a stance of non-alignment and sought to balance its relations with Israel and Arab countries. Pragmatic engagement, 1992 to 2003 The 1990s witnessed a gradual shift in India's approach towards Israel. Economic and technological cooperation began to develop, with a focus on areas such as agriculture, water management, and defense. However, India continued to emphasize its support for the Palestinian cause and called for a peaceful resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Deepening cooperation, 2003 present. In recent years, there has been a significant deepening of bilateral cooperation between India and Israel. Several factors have contributed to this evolution. Firstly, there has been a recognition of Israel's expertise in defense technology, counterterrorism, and innovation, which aligns with India's security and developmental needs. Secondly, there has been a realization that closer ties with Israel do not necessarily undermine India's commitment to the Palestinian cause. India has maintained its support for the establishment of a Palestinian state while simultaneously strengthening its engagement with Israel. Causes for renewed impetus to ties. Defense and security cooperation. India is one of the largest importers of weapons from Israel, contributing to about 40% of Israel's annual arms exports. The two countries have engaged in the co-production and development of state-of-the-art arms systems. Defense partnership extends to sharing crucial technologies and cooperation in the cybersecurity domain. Example: Israel has provided crucial assistance to India in times of crisis, such as during the Kargil conflict in 1999. Global realignment. The shifting dynamics in the global geopolitical landscape have also influenced India's approach towards Israel. India has sought to diversify its strategic partnerships and reduce its dependence on traditional alliances. Closer ties with Israel provide India with access to advanced technology, defense, cooperation, and intelligence sharing that align with its broader foreign policy objectives. Technological collaboration. Both India and Israel have vibrant technology sectors and a strong focus on innovation. They have recognized the potential for collaboration in areas such as agriculture, water management, renewable energy, cybersecurity, and startups. India sees Israel as a source of advanced technology and innovative solutions that can contribute to its development goals. Dehyphenation of relations. The Modi government has pursued a dehyphenated approach, seeking to develop separate and direct relationships with Israel and Palestine. India maintains its traditional support for a PSIR optional paper 2 part B Shunya IAS, Iwo state solution and an independent Palestinian state. This approach allows India to deepen its ties with Israel while also maintaining its broader balancing act in the region, including relations with Iran and Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC countries. Agriculture and water management. Cooperation in the agricultural sector, particularly in areas like water management, research and development, and sharing of best practices, has had a significant impact on building constituencies for Israel at the state level in India. This collaboration has been instrumental in strengthening bilateral ties. Growing economic partnership. Bilateral trade between India and Israel has witnessed significant growth and diversification. Trade has increased from $900 million in 2000 to $7.86 billion in 2021. Investments in startups and technology sectors have also become substantial, with Israeli companies investing in Indian projects. Future prospects. The two countries are exploring opportunities for a comprehensive free trade agreement, deepening collaboration in water management and cybersecurity, and expanding the relationship through trilateral and plurilateral initiatives. Projects in food security, clean energy, transport, and healthcare are being pursued. India's dehyphenated policy to Israel-Palestine. Meaning, India's dehyphenated approach to Israel refers to its policy of establishing and strengthening bilateral relations with Israel independent of its relations with other countries, particularly the Palestinian Authority. Importance of India's hyphenated approach. Strategic alignment. India's hyphenated approach aligns with its national interests and strategic goals. It allows India to engage with Israel, a major technological and defense powerhouse, and leverage its expertise in various sectors. Diversification of partnerships. By developing a separate and independent relationship with Israel, India expands its network of strategic partners beyond traditional alliances. This diversification strengthens India's position in international affairs and reduces dependence on a limited set of allies. Economic benefits. Strengthening ties with Israel brings economic advantages. Israel is known for its advanced technology, innovation, and expertise in sectors such as agriculture, water management, and cybersecurity. India can benefit from Israeli know-how, investment, and trade, leading to economic growth and development maintaining strategic equilibrium. India avoids direct involvement in Israel-Palestine negotiations to safeguard its strategic interests, including its position in Kashmir vis-a-vis Pakistan's stance in West Asia and North Africa. India seeks to maintain a delicate balance to avoid antagonizing Arab nations. Non-aligned and pragmatic stance. India's dehyphenation policy reflects its non-aligned tradition and pragmatic approach to foreign relations. It prioritizes national interests while maintaining a quiet supporter stance for Palestine's statehood. Consistency in approach. India's dehyphenation policy is expected to remain in the foreseeable future, driven by pragmatism and non-alignment. India will sustain relations with Israel and Palestine based on their individual merits regardless of their dynamics with each other. Quotes. India's approach towards Israel and Palestine is guided by our principle of non-alignment and our commitment to the rights of the Palestinian people. T.S. Timurti, India's ambassador to the UN. India's stance on Israel and Palestine is not about taking sides, but about promoting peace, stability, and dialogue in the region. Navtej Sarna, former Indian ambassador to Israel. Dehyphenation enables a country to engage with two adversarial nations on its own terms, without allowing its relationship with one to be dictated by its relationship with the other. Shashi Tharoor. Issues with hyphenated approach. Reduced emphasis on Palestinian cause. As India strengthens its ties with Israel, there is a possibility that the Palestinian cause may receive relatively less attention or priority in India's foreign policy agenda. This could result in a perceived neglect or decreased advocacy for Palestinian rights within international forums. Sunyajas. International perception. India's hyphenated approach may face criticism or scrutiny from countries or organizations that advocate for a coordinated global approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. India must navigate international perceptions and effectively communicate its rationale and commitment to its own national interests. Domestic opinions. Within India, there are diverse opinions on the approach towards Israel, particularly regarding its treatment of Palestinians. The government must consider public sentiment and engage in informed dialogue to ensure broader support for its policies. Advantages of Israeli defense systems for India. Israel's advanced and innovative technologies, such as UAVs, missile defense systems, and surveillance radars, are readily available and can be supplied on short notice. These technologies are useful for peacetime patrolling and surveillance, as well as enhancing the operational capabilities of armed forces during wartime. Israel's defense industry aligns well with India's Make in India initiative, as it is export-oriented and open to establishing joint ventures. Israeli arms can be flexibly deployed across various military branches, simplifying operations during missions. Israel has expertise in customizing its arms to meet the specific requirements of its customers. Israel is known for being a reliable supplier, transferring even its most advanced technology without imposing usage restrictions. These factors make Israel a potential long-term defense partner for India, capable of providing support in various situations. Concerns in the relationship. 1. Economic influence of USA. Some of the Israeli technologies utilize USA components. USA has veto powers over the sale of those technologies. The sale of those technologies. Decline in bilateral trade, from just $200 million in 1992, excluding defense, peaked at about $5 billion in 2012, but since then it has dropped to about $4 billion. Also, bilateral trade has not diversified much. Diamonds and chemicals still make up for the large CIINVAW chunk of the pie. Private sector still finding feet. Indian companies like Sun Pharma and ATG have big interests in Israel. Unsurprisingly, the Chinese are ahead of us and their companies are investing heavily in Israel's cutting-edge startups. Dependence for energy security. 7. India's dependence on Arab states for oil imports led to a pro-Arab tilt in its West Asia policy, which has further constrained Israel's options in the region. 2. Strategic. Historical retrenchment. India's consistent support for a sovereign, independent, viable and united Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, living within secure and recognized borders, side by side, and at peace with Israel and pro-Arab stance has been a sticky point. Cold War politics. Factors like Arab-Israeli conflict, Iran-Israel conflict and constant interference of countries like Russia and USA in such issues and overall relationship of India with these countries have impacted the ties with Israel. Non-alignment. India's commitment to the non-alignment causes freezing relations with Israel. Were increasingly seen as leaning towards the Western Bloc. Israel-Palestine conflict. The territorial conflict. Israel-Palestine conflict. The territorial conflicts of Gaza Strip and West Bank have played an important role shaping India-Israel relationships. Difference in terms of Iran. Israel considers Iran an existential threat, while India, on the other, has a historical relationship. India finds the cooperation useful for energy supplies and an alternative route through Chabahar port to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Shunya IAS. Different approach towards Arab world. While Israel has inherent differences with Arab countries, India has significant stakes there. India's recent vote at the UN against America's move on Jerusalem was a reflection of that underlying reality. Pegasus scam. Israeli spyware software and its use by the Indian government for surveillance is under sub duties for its legality. Human rights issues. Human rights violation by Israel against Palestine has been difficult for India to turn a blind eye. 3. Cultural. Limited people-to-people ties and cultural differences. Israelis and Indians approach business differently and often find it difficult to get on the same page. Though formal ties were established in 1992, the ideological divide resurfaces time and again. Lack of connectivity. Connectivity between the two countries is still poor, with just one direct flight from Mumbai 3 times a week and no direct flights from Delhi. Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords refer to a series of diplomatic agreements that were signed in 2020 between Israel and several Arab countries, including the United Arab Emirates, UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. These accords aim to normalize diplomatic, economic, and cultural relations between Israel and these Arab nations. The Abraham Accords were seen as a major diplomatic achievement as they represented a departure from the long-standing Arab consensus that normalization with Israel should only occur after the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The accords were praised for fostering regional stability, enhancing economic opportunities, and promoting cooperation in areas such as technology, security, tourism, and healthcare. Advantages for India. Multilateral partnerships. The accords allow India to establish new multilateral partnerships with Israel and Arab countries that have formal relations with Israel. This expands India's diplomatic engagement and strengthens its position in the region. Strategic autonomy. The accords enable India to pursue strategic autonomy by engaging in partnerships that are not alliances and maintaining flexibility in its international relations. India can deepen its relationship with the US and expand its global reach. Broadening geographic parameters. The accords broaden the geographic bounds of partnership between the US and India, allowing for deeper engagement and cooperation beyond the Indo-Pacific region. This helps India expand its global influence. Enhanced engagement with the Middle East. The accords provide India with more opportunities to engage multilaterally with key partners in the Middle East, a region that holds strategic significance for India. It facilitates trade ties and strengthens India's energy imports, infrastructure assistance, and agricultural technology partnerships. Aiding global leadership. Participation in initiatives arising from the accords, such as the I2U2 partnership, reinforces India's global leadership aspirations. It aligns with India's foreign policy goals of addressing global challenges and serving as a bridge between developed and developing nations. Israel-Palestine relations. Issues. Historical. Contested history. The Levant region has been the birthplace of all Abrahamic religions and thus historically been the contesting ground for all major such religions. Zionist movement. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Zionist movement emerged, advocating for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine in response to rising anti-Semitism in Europe. British mandate. After World War I, the League of Nations granted Britain a mandate over Palestine, leading to increased Jewish immigration and Arab resistance. Balfour Declaration. The British government expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, sparking hope among Jews and concern among Arabs. Arab-Jewish conflict. Tensions between Arab and Jewish communities escalated, fueled by competing nationalist aspirations and land disputes. United Nations Partition Plan. 1947. The UN proposed a partition plan to divide Palestine into separate Shunya I-5. Wars and conflicts. Arab-Israeli War. After independence in 1948, Egypt launched an aerial assault on Tel Aviv, and the next day, Arab forces from Egypt, Transjordan, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon occupied the areas in southern and eastern Palestine not given to the Jews by the UN partition of Palestine, and then captured East Jerusalem, including the small Jewish quarter of the Old City. Suez Crisis. In October 1956, Israel invaded Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. In 5 days, the Israel Defense Forces (IDF) captured Gaza, Rafah, and Al Arish, taking thousands of prisoners, and occupied most of the peninsula cast of the Suez Canal. 6-Day War. Arab and Israeli forces clashed for the third time June 5 to 10, 1967, in what came to be called the 6-Day War. In early 1967, Syria intensified its bombardment of Israeli villages from positions in the Golan Heights. The Israeli victory on the ground was also overwhelming. Israeli units drove back Syrian forces from the Golan Heights, took control of the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and drove Jordanian forces from the West Bank. Importantly, the Israelis were left in sole control of Jerusalem. Yom Kippur won the October War. The 1973 Arab-Israeli War, or Die Fourth Arab-Israeli War, was an armed conflict fought from 6 to October 25, 1973. Between Israel and a coalition of Arab states led by Egypt and Syria. Israel-Hamas War 2023 ongoing. An armed conflict between Israel and Hamas-led Palestinian militant groups has been taking place chiefly in the Gaza Strip since October 7, 2023. Clashes have also occurred in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and with Hezbollah along the Israel-Lebanon Golan Heights border. Data. Casualties. Since the start of the Israeli operation, more than 35,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed, including over 15,000 children and 10,000 women. Israeli civilian deaths. The latest figure on total number killed during the attack, based on Social Security data, is 1,143, of whom 373 were from Israeli security forces and 766 were civilians, 695 Israeli and 71 foreign. 26.6% of those killed were female. Causes immediate. Hamas attack. The war began when Hamas-led militant groups launched a surprise attack on Israel on October 7, involving a barrage of several thousand concurrent to an estimated 3,000 militants. Breaching the Gaza-Israel barrier and attacking Israeli civilian communities and military base. Civilian hostages. During this attack, 252 Israelis and foreigners were taken hostage to the Gaza Strip. Causing Israel to declare war and a subsequent invasion of the Gaza Strip. Abraham Accords 2020. It refers to the collective agreement between the United States, U.S., the United Arab Emirates, UAE, and Israel that was signed in 2002. These accords were later extended to the countries of Sudan, Bahrain, and Morocco. Sudan is yet to sign an agreement with Israel. It marks the first normalization of ties between Israel and an Arab country since Jordan in 199. The accords were called the Abraham Accords as the Tlur's major monotheistic religions of the war. Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all find their roots in Prophet Abraham. Egypt was the first Arab state to sign a peace deal with Israel in 1979. Jordan signed a peace pact in 199. Presently, only 5 Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, have diplomatic relations with Israel. U.S. reaction to the conflict. India's policy towards Palestine has been long-standing and consistent. It has supported a negotiated two-state solution towards establishment of a sovereign, independent, and viable state of Palestine within SCCU. And recognized borders, living side by side in peace with Israel. Shunya IAS. India has strongly condemned the terror attacks on Israel on October 7, 2023, and the loss of civilian lives in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. We have called for restraint and de-escalation and emphasized peaceful resolution of the conflict through dialogue and diplomacy. We have also called for release of the remaining hostages. Implications for the world Middle East region. Humanitarian crisis. Continued violence in the region could worsen the humanitarian situation, leading to civilian casualties, displacement, and suffering on both sides. This could strain resources and infrastructure in neighboring countries hosting refugees. Extremism. Prolonged conflict often serves as a recruiting tool for extremist groups who exploit grievances to advance their agendas. The Israel-Palestine conflict could fuel radicalization and extremism, posing a threat to regional and global security. Example, the humanitarian crisis and loss of livelihood and death can trigger another generation of extremists to take revenge. Setback for Abraham Accords. The conflict also is a setback for the progress made through the Abraham Accords in normalizing relations between Israel and the Arab states. Risks of escalation. With powerful nations in the region with nuclear powers like Iran, the conflict can blow out of proportion and become a worldwide crisis. Europe. Energy security. The conflict poses to impact Europe's energy security, especially during the time when their access Energy security. The conflict poses to impact Europe's energy security, especially during the time when their access to Russian gas has also been cut off. Two-front conflict. Europe may be drawn into another conflict while it is still engaged in Russia-Ukraine conflict. Trade security. With a majority of Europe's trade occurring through the Suez region, any escalating conflict in the region poses a threat to their economic interests. Refugee crisis. Europe has already dealt with a disastrous refugee crisis in the aftermath of the Syrian war, leading to domestic violence and negative impacts to its demography. The conflict in Palestine can push more refugees towards Europe, especially those in southern and eastern Europe. Rift with NATO. The conflict has already brought out rifts amongst NATO's nations, with Turkey supporting the Palestinian cause whereas UK and other nations are siding with Israel on the issue. Implications for India. Shunya. Geopolitical balancing act with the Middle East. The conflict has again created rifts between the Arab states and Israel on the Palestine question. Both Arab states and Israel are close to India, thus creating a diplomatic hassle for India to deal with. Iran's position. Iran has been the most belligerent of the Arab nations, also launching its own offensives with Israel. With India having warm ties with Iran, the conflict can create difficulties for India. In the neighborhood, the conflict can quickly escalate in the Middle East and impact India's energy and trade interests in the region. Further, its proximity to the Suez poses a risk to India's trade to Europe and North America. Economic. Energy security. Middle East supplies most of India's oil and gas needs, thus any conflict can either sabotage India's energy requirements or make it expensive to import from. Trade relations. India has deep-rooted trade relations with the Arab nations as well as a prospering defense relation with Israel. The conflict poses a threat as both sides are increasingly going against each other over Palestine. Naval security. The war led to attacks on ships, piracy, and hostage-taking off the coast of Yemen and Western Indian Ocean, disrupting trade and safety of Indian sailors. The Indian Navy launched several operations to rescue ships and sailors. Insurance and shipping costs, longer transit times, and uncertainty has had a negative impact on logistics chains and economic integration. India-Iran relations. Previous year's questions. What are the challenges and limitations in India-Iran relations? 2023. Economic relations. Bilateral trade. For the fiscal year 2022 to 2023, the bilateral trade between India and Iran reached $2.30 billion. This represents a year-over-year growth of 21.76%. During this period, India's exports to Iran were valued at $1.66 billion, marking a 14.34% increase, while imports from Iran amounted to $672.12 million, a 45.05% increase. Exports from India to Iran. Major exports include rice, pharmaceuticals, and engineering goods. India's exports in the first 3 months of 2023 were valued at $322 million. Imports from Iran to India. Imports primarily consist of petroleum products, dry fruits, and chemicals. Non-oil imports from Iran registered a 12% growth in early 2023. Rial-rupee trade mechanism. Both nations are working towards implementing a trade mechanism that uses their local currencies, the rial and rupee, to bypass U.S. sanctions and facilitate smoother trade transactions. Energy relations. India's energy relationship with Iran is crucial due to Iran's significant oil and gas reserves. Historically, Iran has been a major supplier of crude oil to India, and despite U.S. sanctions, India continues to view Iran as a key energy partner. Importance. Energy security. Iran provides one of the cheapest and geographically closest sources of crude oil for India. This proximity significantly reduces transportation costs and time, making Iranian oil economically attractive for India. Strategic investments. India has made significant investments in Iran, particularly in the development of the Chabahar port and the construction of a railway link to the Afghan border. These projects are crucial for India as they not only enhance trade routes but also provide strategic leverage in the region. Location. The Strait of Hormuz is a critical choke point for global oil and gas transportation, with a significant portion of India's energy imports passing through this narrow passage. With Afghanistan being a landlocked country, Iran is the only viable overland trade route for India. This route is essential for India's plans to provide humanitarian assistance and maintain economic ties with Afghanistan, especially under the Taliban regime. Strategic. Regional power dynamics. By maintaining strong relations with Iran, India helps create a balance of power in the region against Saudi Arabia, which has closer ties with Pakistan. This power struggle ensures that no single entity dominates the regional geopolitics, thereby protecting India's strategic interests. Isolating Pakistan. Good relations with Iran ensure that Pakistan is strategically isolated on all fronts. With Iran to its west and India to its east, Pakistan faces a complex geopolitical landscape that limits its maneuverability and influence in the region. Access to Central Asia. Iran is a gateway to Central Asian markets for India. Through strategic investments and diplomatic relations, India can penetrate these markets, enhancing trade and economic cooperation. This access is vital for India's ambitions to expand its influence and economic ties in Central Asia. Challenges. Iran-Israel conflict. With Israel being a close partner to India, India's relations with Iran have been risked to become more cold, especially in the aftermath of the Hamas-Israel war, in which Iran is a tactical player. U.S.'s COTSA Act. The COTSA Act has significantly impacted India's trade with Iran. Threats of American sanctions have led India to limit its economic engagements with Iran, affecting oil imports and other trade activities. Shunya's decline in trade. There has been a marked decline in India-Iran trade, with a reported 79% drop between April and November 2020. This decline is attributed to the reimposition of U.S. sanctions and the complexities surrounding international trade with Iran. U.S.-Iran rivalry. The strategic ties between India and the U.S. have led to a complex relationship with Iran. The U.S.'s stance on Iran and the ongoing conflict between the two countries have isolated Iran from India's strategic interests. Chinese influence in Iran. The $400 billion trade and military deal between China and Iran threatens to increase China's presence in the region. This growing influence complicates India's strategic calculations and poses a direct challenge to its regional interests. The deal enhances China's foothold in Iran, potentially undermining India's strategic initiatives in the region. India's balancing act. India's participation in the Middle East Quad, alongside Israel, the USA, and the UAE, may be perceived as anti-Iran. This grouping could sour relations with Iran, complicating India's efforts to balance its diplomatic ticks in the region. The perception of the Middle East Quad as a counter-Iran alliance adds a layer of complexity to India's foreign policy. Kashmiri rhetoric. Iran has frequently condemned India's policy measures regarding Kashmir, leading to diplomatic tensions. These condemnations impact bilateral relations and complicate India's efforts to maintain a positive diplomatic rapport with Iran while addressing its internal security concerns. Way forward. Exploring non-energy trade. India and Iran can engage in other less conflictual avenues of bilateral trade like pharmaceuticals and agricultural products. Exploring investment options, putting more impetus in India's existing projects in Iran like Chabahar Port, rail and link projects, etc. Addressing mutual concerns. Engage with Iran on security issues, particularly concerning the Strait of Hormuz. Collaborative security measures can help ensure the stability of crucial maritime routes and protect energy supplies. India and Saudi Arabia. Bilateral relations. 1. Economic. Argus trading partner. India is the second largest trade partner for Saudi Arabia, whereas Saudi Arabia is India's fourth largest trading partner. During FY23, bilateral trade was valued at US $52.76 billion. During this period, India's imports from Saudi Arabia grew by 23.47% to reach US $42.03 billion, and exports to Saudi Arabia were worth US $10.72 billion, registering an increase of 22.48% on a YoY basis. Total trade with Saudi Arabia accounted for 4.53% of India's total trade in FY 2022-23. Energy. About 18% of India's crude oil needs and about 22% of its LPG needs are met by imports from Saudi Arabia. Indian companies in Saudi. There are over 745 Indian businesses with joint venture or 100% ownership registrations in the kingdom, with investments totaling about US $2 billion. Investment in India. As of March 2021, Saudi Arabia had invested $3.13 billion in India. The Al Banerjee Group, Aramco, Sabic, Zamal, and eHolidays are some significant Saudi investment firms. Recent development. The submarine cable project will be connected from the coast of Gujarat to Saudi Arabia, and the distance from Mundra port in Gujarat to the coastal city of Fujairah in Saudi Arabia is 1,600 km. 2. Defense. Exercise. Joint naval exercises between India and Saudi Arabia, known as the Al-Mode AIHINDL exercise, began in 2021. Strategic partnership. India and Saudi Arabia have been strategic partners. Strategic partnership. India and Saudi Arabia have been strategic partners since they signed the Riyadh Declaration in 2010. Shunya IAS. Defense export. India is in discussions with countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE to export BrahMos, supersonic cruise missiles, and Tyash air defense missiles. Training. Saudi AIM forces have regularly attended training programs at Indian military institutions, including the National Defense College, the College of Defense Management, and the Defense Services and Staff College. Political. 3. Observer in OIC. India being given observer status in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation is backed by Saudi Arabia. OIC cooperation in international forums. In October 2021, India voted against a Dutch resolution in the UN Human Rights Council to extend TLI's Yemen mandate. Saudi Arabia also opposed TLI's resolution. Political acknowledgement. New Delhi and Riyadh accommodated each other's political interests. Saudi Arabia understood India's recent actions in Jammu and Kashmir, and India strongly denounced assaults on Saudi civilian facilities. Cultural. 4. Guest of honor. From February 7 to 28, 2018, India took part as TLI Guest of Honor at the prestigious Saudi National Festival of Heritage and Culture 32nd edition. Yoga. In Saudi Arabia, yoga has also gained a lot of popularity, especially after it was declared a sports activity in November 2017. 150th birthday of Gandhiji. A number of activities were held to commemorate Mahatma Gandhi's 150th birthday. On October 2, 2019, the Gandhi bust was unveiled at the embassy. Hajj pilgrimage. Another crucial aspect of India and Saudi Arabia's bilateral relations is the Hajj pilgrimage. Diaspora 5. Largest diaspora. The 2.6 million-strong Indian community in Saudi Arabia is the largest diaspora group, and most favored due to its skill, discipline, law-abiding, and peace-loving character. E-migrate system. The two parties declared that they will merge the e-migrate system from India and the e-Tawfiq system from the kingdom in 2019 to speed up worker migration. During COVID-19 exchange of ideas, the G20 provided a forum for both nations to exchange ideas about how to tackle the COVID-19 outbreak. Relief work. India gave the kingdom 4.5 million COVID-1 ELD vaccines, whereas Saudi Arabia gave India COVID relief supplies, mainly liquid oxygen, in the second wave. Importance of Saudi Arabia for India. Economic trade. In the fiscal year 2022 to 2023, bilateral trade between India and Saudi Arabia was valued at over $52.76 billion. Saudi Arabia is India's fourth largest trading partner, while India is the second largest trading partner for Saudi Arabia. India Brand Equity Foundation. Asia News Net. Investment. Saudi Arabia plans to invest roughly $0 billion in Indian industries as diverse as agriculture, minerals and mining, in addition to energy, refining, petrochemicals, and infrastructure. Economic reform. Saudi Arabia is undergoing economic reform initiatives and requires both economic and technological support from India. Energy security. In terms of hydrocarbons, India relies heavily on Saudi Arabia as a supplier. Specifically, Saudi Arabia fulfills 18% of India's crude oil demand and 30% of India's LPG needs. 2. Strategic Link West policy. Increasing India's level of engagement with Saudi Arabia can act as a catalyst for the country's Link West policy. To counter Pakistan, Saudi Arabia wields considerable influence over Pakistan. India can use its clout to Shunya IAS. Strategic location. Geographically, Saudi Arabia is close to the Strait of Hormuz. This is crucial for the world's oil trade and crucial strategically for India's energy security. 3. Security. Afghan peace process. As a prominent regional player, Saudi Arabia's view on the happenings in Kabul is important, and Saudi could play an important role in installing peace in Afghan, which is India's interest. Counterterrorism. Saudi Arabia is significant in the Middle East and Muslim world. Riyadh has shown a grasp of India's terrorist worries and pledged to work with it to combat the global problem. 4. Diaspora. Employment. There are nearly 2.8 million Indians working in gainful employment in the kingdom, and they send significant remittances home to India in the form of foreign currency. 5. Importance of India for Saudi labor. India is a significant supplier of labor to Saudi Arabia, which helps that country flourish. Trade. India is the second largest trading partner of Saudi Arabia, and Indian companies are essential for joint ventures and big investments. Education and tourism. India is a desirable location for tourism, education, and medical tourism. Helps Saudi's Vision 2030. India has emerged as a possible partner due to Saudi Arabia's pursuit of modernization and domestic policy under Vision 2030 due to its market potential, demographic structure, infrastructure, defense capabilities, soft power capabilities, etc. Learned from India's development, Saudi Arabia could take inspiration from India's development programs including Skill India, Digital India, Smart Cities, and infrastructure development. Significance of India-Saudi relationship / historical. Age-old ties. The 3rd millennium BC marks the beginning of trade and cultural ties between ancient India and Arabia. By the year 1000 AD, commercial ties between Arabia and southern India were thriving and sensed as the foundation of the Arabian economy. During colonial period, British India generously provided financial support to Najd throughout the 1930s. Post-independence, one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with the third Saudi state was India. 2. Political relations. 1. India and the United Arab Emirates (UAE) established diplomatic relations in 1972. The visit of PM Modi to the UAE in 2015 marked the beginning of a new strategic partnership, strengthening bilateral relations. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, visited India as the chief guest at India's Republic Day celebrations, upgrading the bilateral relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership. PM Modi visited the UAE again in 2018, receiving the UAE's highest civilian award, the Order of Zayed *, and witnessing the launch of the rupee card and commemorative stamps. 3. Economic and commercial relations. India and the UAE have a long history of trade links, which expanded with the discovery of oil in the UAE. Dubai's positioning as a regional trading hub and India's economic liberalization in the 1990s further boosted trade relations. UAE is India's third largest trading partner. UAE is India's second largest export destination. UAE is the 10th biggest FDI investor in India, with significant investments in sectors like oil and gas. India and Saudi Arabia announced a significant agreement to expand their economic and security lies. This includes setting up a joint task force to channelize $0 billion in investments, with a major focus on an oil refinery project in India, September 2023. Shunya IAS. 4. Cultural relations. The Indian expatriate community constitutes around 30% of the UAE's population, with Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh being well-represented states. Asterisk. Approximately 35% of the Indian community comprises professionally qualified personnel, businessmen, and white-collar non-professionals. Indian schools in the UAE follow the CBC and Kerala board curricula with a student population of approximately 219,000. 5. Strategic. Geostrategic. Saudi Arabia is vital to India's foreign policy objectives in the region due to its strategic location in West Asia, the political and economic influence it wields, as well as the world's oil reserves. Convergence of interest. At forums like the UN, G20, and GCC, both nations addressed regional and global topics of shared interest, including their cooperation. Collaboration in the fight against terrorism. The Saudi government has frequently aided India in the capture of important terrorist suspects. 2012 saw Saudi Arabia assist India in capturing a suspect in the 2008 Mumbai attacks. Increasing levels of self-sufficiency through indigenization have led to defense relation. The two countries increased security and defense connections, including intelligence sharing, joint military exercises, joint military training, etc. Exercises. India and Saudi Arabia commenced joint military drills in Rajasthan, reflecting their commitment to strengthening defense ties and cooperation. Challenges. /1. Political. Saudi and Iran rivalry. Rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran in the region may make it difficult for India to pursue cooperative partnership with both nations. Saudi-Iran rivalry. India maintains close ties with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. India finds it difficult to balance its ties with Saudi Arabia and the United States on the one hand and Iran on the other. Crisis in Qatar. It erupted when 9 nations severed all diplomatic ties with Qatar, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain. Internal politics. Future relations may be impacted by internal politics in India. Internal politics. Future relations may be impacted by internal politics in India, particularly those involving religious minorities. 2. Economic. Trade deficit. At the moment, India has a trade deficit with Saudi Arabia that amounts to $25.25 billion. Issues of diaspora. It is possible that Indian diaspora will be affected by directives given by the Saudi government promote a policy known as Saudization in order to provide more employment opportunities for Saudi natives. 3. Strategic. Saudi Arabia's involvement in the CPEC. King has signed agreements worth $10 billion for a refinery and petrochemical complex at Gwadar, which is located at the center of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. Role of Pakistan. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have strong military connections. India's tense relations with Pakistan may prevent India-Saudi relations from reaching their full potential. Way forward. Maritime security. Saudi Arabia has interests in playing a role in the Indian Ocean region. Increasing cooperation in the area of marine security from its current level would be in the interests of both countries. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B. Shunya IAS. Balancing with Iran. Given Indian investment and involvement in the Chabahar port project in Iran, India must consider Saudi Arabia as a crucial partner, notably in energy and defense, while at the same time see Iran as a gateway to Central Asia. Export promotion. India should put greater effort into fostering exports across a range of industries. It would allow us to develop positive trade partnerships while preserving the kingdom's trade balance. Space cooperation. An essential area where bilateral engagements should be strengthened is space. India could look into the possibility for cooperation with the recently founded Saudi Space Agency. Increasing cultural interaction. The focus of improving bilateral relations should remain on cultural exchanges and interaction. China's rise in the Middle East. China has strengthened its foothold in the Middle East in the 21st century. It has improved its economic and diplomatic relations with the countries of the Middle East, or more broadly with the countries of the MENA region, for primarily 3 objectives. It wants to increase its political influence in the region and contest the US's policies in the region, to ensure continuous energy supplies from the region to keep its economy expanding, and to translate the BIU initiative into a global success with the cooperation from the Middle East states. Instances of China's rise. Brokering regional rapprochement. China has facilitated a rapprochement between regional rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran, showcasing its ability to influence and mediate regional conflicts. Economic and financial influence. China's Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, opened its first overseas office in the United Arab Emirates, indicating China's growing economic presence in the Middle East. The AIIB aims to support China's development initiatives and serves as an alternative to Western-dominated institutions. Shift in energy trade. China has become a significant customer for Middle Eastern countries, particularly in the energy sector. Deals such as the $60 billion liquefied natural gas, LNG, agreement with Qatar and discussions about trade in currencies other than the US dollar demonstrate a potential shift in energy dynamics. Clean energy cooperation. China has been engaging in clean energy cooperation with Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Agreements on renewable energy and green hydrogen cooperation highlight China's involvement in the region's clean tech sector. Diplomatic influence. China's diplomatic efforts in the Middle East, while less significant than economic considerations, aim to strengthen ties with major Gulf states. By expanding into foreign markets and fostering economic and diplomatic relations, China enhances its influence in the region. Impact on Middle East. China's as a mediator. The normalization process between Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, can help reduce tensions and conflicts in the region. The deal may have a positive impact on resolving issues such as the Yemeni civil war and can facilitate the normalization of relations between Gulf states, Syria, and Lebanon. Extending Chinese BRI. China's involvement in the Middle East may have detrimental effects on the region. While some argue that Chinese investments and trade relations bring economic benefits, they actually serve to deepen the region's reliance on China and undermine its sovereignty. The Belt and Road Initiative (BRD), often touted as a development project, is nothing more than a strategic tool used by China to extend its influence and exploit the resources of Middle Eastern countries. Shift in geopolitical dynamics. China's rising influence in the Middle East can alter the geopolitical landscape of the region. As China becomes a major player, it provides an alternative to the dominant influence of the United States. Middle Eastern countries may see China as a potential ally and partner, especially as they seek to diversify their trade relations and reduce overdependence on the U.S. Shunya IAS. Impact on Indian. Strategic encirclement. China's expanding presence in the Middle East could lead to a strategic encirclement of India. With its military installations and naval bases in the region, China gains greater access and influence over India's neighboring countries, potentially increasing the pressure on India from multiple fronts. Energy security. The Middle East is a crucial source of energy for India, with a significant portion of its oil imports coming from the region. China's deepening ties and partnerships with Middle Eastern countries may lead to a competition for resources, thereby increasing prices or limiting India's energy options. Economic competition. China's economic investments and trade relations with Middle Eastern countries may create a competitive disadvantage for India. Chinese companies, backed by significant financial resources, can outbid Indian firms and secure lucrative contracts, affecting India's economic interests in the region. Is there a decline of the U.S. in the Middle East? 1. Points against decline. Perception v. Reality. The perception of American decline in the Middle East, although not entirely aligned with the actual reality, stems from the U.S. military strategic withdrawal from areas of overextension and failed interventions, Iraq, Syria. Nonetheless, the United States still maintains a significant presence in the region through its extensive network of military bases and alliances. Furthermore, no major rival power has emerged to challenge or replace American dominance in the middle credible military presence and alliances. The United States maintains an extensive network of military bases and alliances across the Middle East, which allows it to exert influence and project power. For example, the U.S. has military bases in countries like Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, and has long-standing alliances with countries such as Saudi Arabia and Israel. Regional security commitments. The U.S. has continued to demonstrate its commitment to regional security through arms sales, military assistance, and joint exercises with its partners. For example, it promotes stability in TLI region. /I. Military aid and support to countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq to enhance their defense capabilities and petrodollar arrangement. The use of the US DQL jar in oil transactions gives the United States geopolitical leverage in the Middle East. It strengthens the economic ties between the U.S. and oil-exporting countries, fostering relationships and influencing regional dynamics. This leverage can be seen in the U.S.'s ability to impose economic sanctions or exercise economic diplomacy, leveraging its control over the global financial system. UNVA. Points supporting decline ZJ. Doubtful capabilities. U.S. capabilities have been outweighed by its inability to achieve desired outcomes. Perception of decline linked to doubts about U.S. capabilities and intention. Examples. Inability to establish a durable state in Iraq, failure to overthrow Assad in Syria, chaos in Libya after Gaddafi's overthrow, stalemate in Yemen. Rise of China and Russia. Russia capitalizes on U.S. retrenchment perception to undermine alliances and project influence. China welcomes opportunities to secure economic interests through partnerships and investment. Example. China helped broker the peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, while Russian warships have also been allowed to dock in Saudi Arabia in 2023 during the Ukraine conflict. Quote, Russia and China don't question their human rights record and don't make selling military weapons to them conditional to their records. Quote, Russia and China don't question their human rights record and don't make selling military weapons to them conditional to their records. Hassan Awad, Middle East expert. Declining stability of regional allies. Key allies. Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia face domestic instability. Allies' unpredictability contributes to U.S. decline. Also, diverging priorities and deteriorating alliance system create a self-fulfilling prophecy. President Biden's visit to the Gulf Cooperation Council summit in Jeddah was to assert Washington's influence in the Gulf and Greater Middle East at a time when some Arab states like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt have been losing confidence in the U.S. as a regional security guarantor. Shunya IAS. India UAE. The UAE occupies a vital place in India's West Asia policy. The political and diplomatic engagements with the UAE have seen a substantial increase in recent times. Certainly, trade, investment and energy are the most visible features of India-UAE ties, but over the past few years, another element which has been swiftly entering the discourse between the two countries is security. India and the UAE established diplomatic relations in 1972. The greater push has been achieved in bilateral relations when the visit of India's Prime Minister to the UAE in August 2015 marked the beginning of a new strategic partnership between the two countries. Views of scholars. Jaisley Anchor. He emphasizes the growing trade ties, investments, and energy cooperation between the two countries. Dr. Jaishankar also stresses the importance of strategic collaboration in areas such as security and regional stability. Dr. Anwar Gargash, the former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates, discussed the strategic partnership between the two countries, highlighting potential areas for collaboration such as defense, counterterrorism, and renewable energy. Ambassador Navdeep Suri. He discusses the significant role played by the Indian diaspora in fostering bilateral ties and highlights the importance of leveraging cultural exchanges for mutual benefit. PM Modi's recent, February 2024, visit to UAE highlights / bilateral investment treaty. This agreement will be a key enabler for further promoting investments in both countries. India has signed both a bilateral investment treaty and a comprehensive partnership agreement with UAE. Economic. Mao on cooperation in the field of electricity interconnection and trade. This opens new areas of collaboration in the field of energy, including energy security and energy trade. B. Intergovernmental Framework Agreement concerning cooperation for the empowerment and operation of the India-Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. This would build on previous. C. Mao on cooperation in digital infrastructure projects. This will create a framework for a wide-ranging cooperation, including investment cooperation, in the digital infrastructure sector and also facilitate sharing of technical knowledge, skills, and expertise. D. Cooperation Protocol between the National Library and Archives of the UAE and the National Archives of India. This protocol will shape extensive bilateral cooperation in this field, including restoration and preservation of archival material. E. Mao on development of National Maritime Heritage Complex. NMHC. This would foster engagement between the two countries aimed at supporting the Maritime Heritage Complex at Lathal, Gujarat. F. Agreement on interlinking of the instant payment platforms, UPI, India, and AANI, UAE. This will facilitate seamless cross-border transactions between the two countries. This follows the Mao on interlinking payment and messaging systems signed in July last year during Honorable PM's visit to Abu Dhabi. G. Agreement on interlinking domestic debit/credit cards, Rupee India with J1, UAE. An important step in building financial sector cooperation. This will enhance the universal acceptance of Rupee across the UAE. The Prime Minister congratulated President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan on the launch of UAE's domestic card J1, which is based on the digital Rupee credit and debit card stack. The leaders. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B Sunyas. The leaders also discussed the strengthening of energy partnership. TLI appreciated that, in addition to the UAE being among the largest sources of crude and LPG, India is now entering into long-term contracts for LNG. Rights Limited signed an agreement with Abu Dhabi Ports Company and Gujarat Maritime Board with Abu Dhabi Ports Company. These would help in building port infrastructure and further enhance connectivity between the two countries. The Prime Minister thanked President His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan for his personal support and for his graciousness in granting the land for the construction of the BAPS Temple in Abu Dhabi. Both sides noted that the BAPS Temple is a celebration of U-India friendship, deep-rooted cultural bonds, and an embodiment of the UAE's global commitment to harmony, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence. Pillars of Cooperation 1. Economic. Energy. India imported crude oil worth $16.84 billion from the UAE in 2022 to 23, marking a substantial increase from previous years. This positions the UAE as a crucial supplier of crude oil to India, IDSA. Trade and investment trade between India and the UAE touched historic highs, going from $72.9 billion in FY22 to $84.5 billion in FY23. The UAE is also regarded as a valuable source of foreign direct investment, FDI, in India. UAE investments are currently billed about $18 billion. Local currency settlement. India and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, have signed a pact to establish AED for cross-border transactions. Local Currency Settlement System, LCSS, to promote the use of the Indian rupee, INR, and UAE dirham. 2. Military. Security. India is keen on enhancing security cooperation with the UAE to counter terrorist threats and combat online radicalization. India and UAE hold annual defense dialogue. Defense exercises. Desert Eagle bilateral exercise between air forces of Botli countries, joint naval exercise. Gulf Star 1, conducted in 2018. 3. Human resource. Diaspora. Indians are the largest ethnic community, about 30% of the population in all walks of services, administrative, health and tourism and labor, and send remittances of about $14 billion a year. Example. Indian diaspora in UAE. Around 3 million Indians are living harmoniously in the UAE. Technology 7 partnerships. Both countries have signed several digital innovations, technology partnerships, and plans to cooperate on missions like the Red Moon mission. Example. The Emirates has offered golden visa residency permits for doctors, engineers, PhD scholars, and specialists in high-end technology fields such as artificial intelligence, AI. 4. Strategic. Jammu and Kashmir. After India's move on Article 370 and bifurcating Jammu Kashmir, the UAE was one of the first countries to offer its support and has subsequently signed a number of MOUs promising investment and infrastructure in J&K and starting flights. Terrorism extradition and support, from being seen as a safe haven for some of India's most wanted terrorists and underworld figures. Post-2001, the UAE decided to change policies and now cooperates with India both on extraditing fugitives and terror suspects as well as intelligence sharing. I2U2. India and UAE are both members of I2U2, which can help converge the interests of India, UAE, and Israel in the Middle East. VVHV docs the UAE need India as its partner. 1. Geopolitics. Iran. Since Iran is threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz in case there is a conflict with Saudi Arabia or US, UAE is trying to rope in nations like India who are closer to Iran. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B Shunya IAS. Non-deliver rank by Pakistan. UAE saw Pakistan as a partner and incorporated a deep economic and security relationship with it. But in the present day, Pakistan does not seem to be of much help to the UAE. So it resorts towards India geopolitical balancing. UAE engages in geopolitical balancing to diversify its alliances and mitigate risks. Strengthening ticks with India provides the UAE with additional leverage and influence in the broader Indian Ocean region, balancing its relationships with other regional and global powers. 2. Economic. Oil market. India is an important destination for oil and energy purchase as the US is on the way to becoming hydrocarbon independent. Infrastructure export. UAE's massive sovereign wealth funds can act as a great resource in the development of infrastructure in India. Diversification of partnerships. In an increasingly interconnected world, diversifying diplomatic and economic partnerships is essential for the UAE to reduce dependency on any single country or region. Building closer ties with India complements the UAE's efforts to broaden its international relations and reduce reliance on traditional allies. 3. Security. Strategic location. Both the UAE and India occupy strategic positions in their respective regions. Collaboration between the two countries can facilitate trade and investment flows not only between them but also across the broader Middle East, Africa, and South Asia, leveraging their geographic advantages. Issue of terrorism. There has been a rising convergence between India and UAE on the terror issue, and both the countries talked of the need to combat terror groups without any discrimination. Example. Recently, 5 UAE diplomats were killed in an attack in Kandahar in Afghanistan. 4. Diplomatic. India being a natural partner, as UAE looks east to find partners for its economic growth and with security concerns emanating from turmoil in West Asia and growing threat from terrorism, it finds a natural partner in India. High-level treaties. In 2017, the two sides signed the Agreement on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, CSP. Shunya. Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, CEPA. It is a kind of free trade pact which covers negotiation on the trade in services and investment and other areas of economic partnership. 1. Why does the FTA with the UAE matter? Increased trade. With the conclusion of the CEPA, India and UAE aim to increase bilateral goods trade over the next 5 years to $100 billion. Employment opportunities in UAE. It also obliges the UAE to offer 1.4 million work visas for highly skilled professionals from India. Zero duty exports. Around 90% of products exported from India to UAE will attract zero duty with implementation of the agreement, reflecting requirements for substantial processing of up value addition. It also has stringent rules of origin to 40% value addition. Market accessibility. Through the pact, Indian exporters will also get access to the much larger Arab and African markets. Promote Indian exports. SEPA is likely to benefit about $26 billion worth of Indian products that are currently subjected to 5% import duty by the UAE, India's third biggest trading partner behind the US and China. Shunya IAS. Challenges in India-UAE relations. 1. Energy pricing. As an OPEC country, UAE is on the supply side of the debate, whereas India, as a major oil consumer, is arguing for a cap on prices. 2. Balancing geopolitics. India with Iran and UAE, also played out over Yemen, and UAE with India and China. 3. Treatment of Indian labor. Indians aren't granted citizenship in the UAE, and conditions at Indian labor camps is also a matter of concern. Example. During the pandemic, much of the labor to the Gulf has had to return, and remittances are likely to be slashed in the next few years. 4. Air Sendies Agreement. India and UAE are yet to renegotiate their air services agreement, which has become a thorn in ties, because the UAE wants to increase the number of flights to India and the number of destinations, but India continues to cap these to protect Indian airlines. 5. Treatment of minorities in India. Organization of Islamic Cooperation, UAE is a member, has raised concerns and issued strong statements against perceived injustices against Muslim minorities in India. 6. Israel-Palestine issue. Even though UAE has established diplomatic relations with Israel, they have been fraught with issues since the outbreak of Israel's war on Hamas. With India being a close partner to both UAE and Israel, the Palestine issue may become problematic for India to navigate with. Way forward. Improving the investment climate in India. India has a huge market, and there is a significant scope for growth. In automobile industry, Sindhi's sector, agriculture, and allied industries. If business regulations are eased and the time spent on getting clearances can be reduced, it can lead to major investments from UAE. Enhancing defense engagement. There is a need to further enhance cooperation through joint training. Programs for Indian and UAE officers. Increasing the number of Emirati officers who can avail training in its defense schools will lead to greater familiarization within the defense establishment. Promoting medical tourism. India's private hospitals have the necessary infrastructure, facilities, and expertise to provide world-class medical care within a fraction of the cost spent in developed countries. Hence, it can be an important area where India can attract Emiratis. Renewable energy. The cost for production and transmission of solar energy in the UAE are a fraction to that of India, and this is a priority area for the UAE government. Indian companies with expertise in this area can invest in the renewable energy sector in UAE education sector. India has some of the finest higher education institutions in engineering and management fields, and given their cost-effective and world-class education, they can be a major attraction for UAE students looking for acquiring higher education and better skills. Enhancing people-to-people contacts. There is a need for enhancing the people-to-people contacts for familiarization and increasing interactions between think tanks, researchers, and through academic exchanges. India-Canada relations. Quotes of scholars. Peter Scott, the diplomat, he explores the impact of the diplomatic role on military relations, asserting that while political tensions are high, military cooperation between India and Canada remains largely unaffected. C. Rajamohan on Nijar issue. He emphasizes that this incident underscores the complexities and fragility of bilateral ties, especially when domestic political issues, such as the influence of the Sikh diaspora in Canada, intersect with international diplomacy. B. He highlights that both countries have significant stakes in maintaining a stable relationship, given their roles in regional and global forums, such as the G20 and their strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific region, Asia Foundation, Brookings. Suhasini Haider. The ongoing tensions with Canada illustrate the complexities and potential pitfalls in this balancing act, especially as India seeks to enhance its global standing while managing domestic and international. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part ** B Shunya IAS. Current Relations L Economic. Bilateral trade. In 2023, trade between India and Canada experienced significant growth despite ongoing diplomatic tensions. The total bilateral trade for the fiscal year 2022 to 23 stood at $8.16 billion. India's exports to Canada were valued at approximately $4.1 billion, while imports from Canada were about $4.06 billion. FDI. Canada is India's 17th largest foreign investor, pouring in more than $3.6 billion since 2000. Trade relations. OSEPA. In 2010, Canada and India launched negotiations toward a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, SEPA. The most recent full negotiating round was held in August 2017 in New Delhi. Top exports from India. The main items exported by India to Canada are jewelry, cotton yarn, organic chemicals, coffee, spices, iron and steel articles, textiles, carpets, floor spreads, and processed foods. Top imports to India. The main products exported from Canada to India were dried legumes, S524M, coal briquettes, $406 million, and potassic fertilizers, S365M. Growth rate. During the last 25 years, the exports of Canada to India have increased at an annualized rate of 8.81%, from $3.27 in 1995 to S2.7B in 2020. Economic presence. More than 400 Canadian companies have a presence in India, and more than 1,000 companies are actively pursuing business in the Indian market. Bilateral agreements. Canada also has an advanced suite of bilateral agreements and MOUs with India that touch on commerce. Bilateral agreements. Canada also has an advanced suite of bilateral agreements and MOUs with India that touch on commerce, including O nuclear cooperation, O double taxation, O science and technology agriculture, O civil aviation, happy face, O energy, O education, O information and communications technologies, O India-Canada Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, SEPA, relaunch talks. O relaunch of negotiations. TLI ministers agreed to formally relaunch the negotiations for India-Canada Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, SEPA, and also consider an interim agreement or early progress trade agreement, EPTA, that could bring early commercial gains to both the countries. O collaboration on supply chain. The ministers acknowledged the significance of establishing resilient supply chains in critical sectors and exchanged views on collaboration in this area. O enhancing cooperation. They emphasized enhancing cooperation in sectors such as pharmaceuticals and critical and rare earth minerals, as well as in areas like tourism, urban infrastructure, renewable energy, and mining. 2. Strategic/security. Renewables. Canada supports India's energy security and environmental ambitions through increased exports of renewable energy and clean technology with a focus on bioenergy, wind, hydro, and solar, as well as water and sewage treatment. Civil nuclear cooperation. A nuclear cooperation agreement, NCA, with Canada was signed in 2010 and came into force in 2013. The appropriate arrangement, AA, for the NCA was signed in 2013, under which a joint committee on civil nuclear cooperation was constituted. Space cooperation. ISRO and the Canadian Space Agency, CSA, signed 2 MOUs in the field of exploration and utilization of outer space in October 1996 and March 2003. Antriksh, the commercial arm of ISRO, has launched several nano-satellites from Canada. ISRO, in its 100th satellite PSLV launched on January 12, 2018, also flew Canada's first LEO satellite. O benefit, it can also help ISRO tap the vast Canadian space market. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B. Shunya IAS. Counter-terrorism. There is robust cooperation on counter-terrorism issues, particularly through the framework of the JWG on counter-terrorism. O fact. The security cooperation was further enhanced with the framework for cooperation between India and Canada on countering terrorism and violent extremism signed by the NSA of India and the National Security and Intelligence Advisor of Canada on February 14, 2018. Uranium exports. Canada 2015 agreed to supply 3,000 metric tons of uranium to energy-hungry India from this year under a $254 million 5-year period. O benefit. India's rising nuclear energy security for civilian and renewable purposes. India-Canada Strategic Dialogue. It was co-chaired by former EM, SMT Sushma Swaraj and her Canadian counterpart Chrystia Freeland were held on February 22, 2018 on the sidelines of PM Trudeau's visit. O benefit. Consolidating the common concerns facing both democracies, like the rise of China and unilateralism. Social sector. 3. Social infrastructure. Canada is also helping India meet its substantial urban and transportation infrastructure needs for roads, rail, airports, ports, dams, and Sindhis segments through TLI provision of financing, equipment, technology, and engineering services. Education. 4. Indian students studying in Canada. Recently, India became TLI top source of foreign students. YTH 203,000 Indian students studying in Canada. John, 69 reputed Canadian faculty members have visited India so far under the Global Initiative of Academic Works, John, program for teaching assignments in Indian institution. Spark. Canada is one of the 28 countries covered under the Scheme for Promotion of Academic A&D Research Collaboration, Spark, an initiative aiming to improve research ecosystems in India's higher education institution. Science and Technology. 5. Research, promoting commercial research and development and collaboration to drive innovation in sectors such as information and communications technologies, science, technology, and innovation, DG. TAL. Industries, artificial intelligence, deep technology, machine learning, and the Internet of Things, LOT. Pharma sector. Canada is focusing on opportunities for Canadian partnerships as suppliers in TLIL. IFE. Sciences sector to support India's industry-leading presence in the pharmaceutical sector. O benefit. This can also in turn lead to Canada being an eligible market for Indian pharma export. Agriculture. The 5th round of JWG on agriculture was held on 13 to 14 November 2001. 7. A joint working group for pulses has been set up separate. LY. Indo-Canadian Science and Technology Cooperation. It has been primarily focused on Pramod. ING. Industrial R&D which has potential for application through the development of new IP, processes, prototypes, or product. CTS. Impacts Scheme, Department of Biotechnology under TLI-IC Impacts Program implements joint research projects in healthcare, agribiotech, and waste management. And Cultu. RAL. 6. Film Festivals. Canada was the country of focus at the 48th International Film Festival of India held in Goa in November 2. 017. Diaspora. Canada's population is about 37 million, of which nearly 4 million people are of Indian ethnic or cultural origin, making up about 3.7% of the country's total population according to the 2021 SUS. PSIR Optional Paper 2 Part B. Shunya IAS. ISIX/Chalkanks to the Relations 1. Historical. NATO NAM issue. Canada's status as a founding member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was at odds with India's non-aligned movement, NAM, membership and its aim to maintain strategic neutrality between the two Cold War blocs. Kashmir. Fault links first emerged in 1948 when Canada supported a plebiscite, followed by a ceasefire in the Indian Slate of Kashmir, a position that was antithetical to India's interests. Differences over other issues of international importance further deepened the gulf between India and Canada. Example, during the 60s, John Diefenbaker's Conservative Party-led government in Canada was considered to be closer to Pakistan under the leadership of Ayub Khan than to India. Ideological. Canada was sympathetic to the U.S. position on Vietnam in the International Control Commission established by the Geneva Conference in 1954. India was more sensitive to the interests of the Communist bloc. Pokhran II. Canada viewed the Pokhran event as an act of betrayal by India, and policymakers in Ottawa were concerned that Indian nuclear tests would motivate other non-nuclear states to pursue similar capabilities. 2. Security. Khalistan movement. India's concerns about the presence of radical elements within the Canadian Sikh diaspora are rooted in the troubled history of its northern state of Punjab. Between the 1980s and 1990s, the Khalistan movement in Punjab threatened India's territorial integrity and communal harmony. Example, in 2010, for instance, Liberal MPs Suk Dhaliwal and Andrew Kania introduced a petition in the House of Commons asking Ottawa to consider the 1984 riots as an act of genocide and discuss the issue with New Delhi. India's concerns about the presence of radical elements within the Canadian Sikh diaspora are rooted in the troubled history of its northern state of Punjab. Between the 1980s and 1990s, the Khalistan movement in Punjab threatened India's territorial integrity and communal harmony. Rising Indian asylum seekers. The 2018 report by the Intelligence and Analysis Wing of the Canada Border Services Agency has complicated matters. According to the report, by mid-2018, asylum claims by Indian nationals had risen by 246%. Fact, a frequent claim cited by Indian nationals is the fear of arbitrary arrest or abuse by the police, based on accusations of supporting militant organizations. Economic Shunya delayed agreements. While the CEPA negotiations continue, there has been a delay in the FIPA discussions due to differences between India and Canada on issues such as the investor-state dispute settlement. Low trade volumes. Canada remains an insignificant trading partner for India. In 2017, compared to other North American countries, Indian exports to Canada stood at just over $2 billion, behind the US and Mexico. Canadian public perception. India must foster a deeper understanding of Canada and the potential it holds for India. While the Indian public perception of Canada seems positive, there is little understanding of Canada and its position in world affairs. Data. According to a Pew Research Center survey, about 40% of Canadian respondents believe that India plays a more important role in the world. Shunya ISM B happy face. India-Canada standoff over Khalistan issue. Background. Tensions between India and Canada have escalated as Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused India of involvement in the assassination of designated Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada in 2023. India has denied these allegations and accused Canada of sheltering Khalistani extremists, which led to increased diplomatic tensions. Khalistan movement and its origin. Separatist movement. The Khalistan movement is a Sikh separatist movement aimed at establishing a separatist movement. The Khalistan movement is a Sikh separatist movement aimed at establishing a sovereign Sikh state known as Khalistan in the Punjab region. The term Khalistan means land of the Khalsa. Historical origins. Pre-independence. The roots of the Khalistan movement can be traced back to India's independence and the subsequent partition, which divided the Punjab province between India and Pakistan. Post-independence. Partition. Lahore, once the capital of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Sikh Empire, and significant Sikh sites like Nankana Sahib, the birthplace of Guru Nanak, became part of Pakistan after the partition. Minority status in India. As a result of partition, Sikhs, constituting a mere 2% of India's total population, found themselves in a minority position. Demand for separate state. The demand for a Punjabi-speaking state was initially rejected by the States Reorganization Commission in 1955, but Punjab was later reorganized in 1966. Demand for autonomy. The political struggle for greater autonomy for Sikhs in Punjab began with the Punjabi Suba movement. This movement energized the Akali Dal, leading to the Anand-Pur Sahib Resolution, 1973, which sought greater autonomy for Punjab, not secession from India. Globalization of the movement, the demand for autonomy evolved into a global movement for Khalistan by 1971, with an advertisement in the New York Times announcing its birth. Solent phase, in the 1980s, the movement gained momentum, marked by the rise of Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale and his followers' civil disobedience movements, and the Dharam Yudh Morcha, 1982, based in the Golden Temple, which led to violent clashes with the government. Military operations by India. The Khalistan movement faced a severe crackdown in India through Operation Blue Star in 1984 and Operation Black Thunder in 1986 and 1988. Diaspora support. Despite TLI's military actions, it continues to find sympathy and support among segments of the Sikh population living in the Sikhly diaspora in countries like Canada, the UK, and Australia. Canadian factor in Khalistan movement. Operation Blue Star Parade, June 2023 in Brampton. A parade glorified the assassination of Indira Gandhi and called for revenge, raised concerns about support for Khalistan in Canada. Pro-Khalistan referendum 2022. Sikhs for Justice conducted a symbolic Khalistan referendum in Brampton, indicating ongoing backing for the Khalistan cause in certain Canadian Sikh communities. Canadian criticism. In 2020, Canada criticized India for arresting British Sikh activist Jagtar Singh Johal and demanded his release and a fair trial. Terrorist Threat to Canada Report 2018. Canada's annual Terrorist Threat to Canada report included Sikh extremism and Khalistan. However, in 2019, just one day before Vaisakhi, all references to Khalistan and Sikh extremism were removed from the report. Extremist incidents in Canada. In 2018, a Sikh temple in Surrey, British Columbia was vandalized with Khalistani symbols and slogans. Sanj Savera magazine, 2002. In 2002, a Toronto-based Punjabi magazine celebrated the murder of Indira Gandhi. Even received Canadian government ads highlighting concerns about support for violence and separatism. Impact on diplomatic relations. These activities have strained India-Canada relations, with India expressing concerns about these events openly, and Canada is under pressure to address them while respecting freedom of expression. Shunya IAS. Standpoint of India and Canada on Khalistan radicalism. 1. Diplomatic standpoint of Canada. Hardeep Singh Nijjar case. Canada treats the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar as a litmus test for upholding the rule of law and global order, regardless of India's grievances. Trudeau's argument. Prime Minister Trudeau emphasizes Canada's commitment to the rule of law and free speech and the rights of Sikhs to express their views as long as they follow Canadian laws. Allied support. Canada has support from allies like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, who endorse Canada's position and call on India to cooperate in the investigation. Diplomatic significance. Canada's unwavering commitment to the protection of its citizens carries diplomatic weight. However, it is important to note that there is no definitive proof that India was involved in Nijjar's murder. 2. Diplomatic standpoint of India. Rejection of allegations. India dismissed Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's allegations regarding the Nijjar case as absurd and motivated and demanded concrete evidence for substantiation. Willingness to examine. Despite dismissing the allegations, India expresses its readiness to examine Canadian concerns if specific evidence and substantiation is provided. National laws. India asserts that its national laws cannot be used to promote secession or glorify violence. It calls on Canada to take legal action against Khalistani propagandists and individuals involved in hate speech and violence on Canadian soil. Diplomatic engagement. India remains open to diplomatic engagement with Canada to address the Nijjar case and other ongoing issues, emphasizing dialogue and cooperation for dispute resolution. Cooperation on genuine issues. India maintains its readiness to cooperate on genuine issues related to its citizens and emphasizes the importance of cooperation in resolving such matters. Other arguments. Canada's obligations under international law. Canada is obligated under international law, particularly UNSC Resolution 1373, to take action against Khalistani separatists operating on its soil. The resolution denounces any form of state support to terrorism, which includes preventing terrorists from using their territory to plot against other states. Canada is criticized for not acting against Khalistani groups despite an extradition treaty with India. Indian diplomatic premises in Canada has been breached, which is against the sanctity of principles. International law. Impact of the standoff on India-Canada relations. 1. Trade disruptions. Halted CEPA negotiations. Ongoing issues, including tariffs and intellectual property rights, have stalled the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement (CEPA) negotiations. Trade pause and missed opportunities. In 2022, India and Canada had a substantial trade relationship exceeding $13.7 billion, making India Canada's 10th largest trading partner for merchandise. However, recent developments have led to a pause in trade talks and the cancellation of a planned trade mission to India. Bilateral investment. The strained relations will affect the bilateral investments between India and Canada. Uncertainty and tensions can discourage businesses from making new investments in each other's countries. Market access restrictions. The rift may result in additional restrictions and regulations on market access, particularly in sectors where Canada and India have substantial trade ties, such as agriculture, information technology, and pharmaceuticals. Supply chain disruptions. The disruptions in bilateral trade may have a cascading effect on global supply chains that involve both India and Canada. 2. Security and immigration. Khalistani extremist concerns. India's concerns about Khalistani extremist groups in Canada and the Shunya IAS, B. Security threat to sovereignty. Demonstrations and vandalism by Sikh separatists at Indian diplomatic missions raise concerns about Indian sovereignty and integrity. Rise in asylum claims. The ongoing tensions and the Khalistan movement have led to a 246% increase in asylum claims by Indian nationals in Canada. Increased radicalization. The presence of Khalistani extremist groups in Canada and the promotion of pro-Khalistani sentiments can lead to radicalization and extremism within certain segments of the Sikh diaspora. Anti-terrorism measures. The strained relations could affect cooperation on anti-terrorism measures, making it challenging to address common security threats effectively. Review of border and immigration policies as a response to India's concerns about Khalistani elements. Canada may review or modify its border and immigration policies, potentially leading to stricter entry requirements for Indians. 3. Diplomatic and bilateral relations. Strained diplomacy. Ongoing tensions strain diplomatic ticks impacts overall bilateral relations and cooperation on international matters. Mutual trust and confidence between the two nations may erode. Potential disengagement. The strained relations may lead to a period of disengagement where both nations focus more on internal matters and divert resources from their bilateral relationship. Diplomatic representation. Diplomatic missions may be affected, with both countries potentially reducing or altering their representation in each other's nations. Cultural exchange disruption. The ongoing issues have hindered cultural exchanges and people-to-people interactions. Cultural programs, educational exchanges, and collaborations in the arts may experience disruptions. Climate cooperation at risk. India and Canada's role. Global climate initiatives faces uncertainty due to strained diplomacy, potentially hindering collaborative efforts to combat climate change and achieve sustainable development goals. Hindered global collaborations. Diplomatic tensions between India and Canada could hamper their ability to work together on global issues. This may weaken their influence and effectiveness in international forums and organizations. Way forward. Decouple Khalistan from trade. Two nations should separate the Khalistan issue from trade and investment relations to prioritize trade negotiations and the Free Trade Agreement (FTA). Constructive engagement. India should establish direct channels for engagement with the Sikh diaspora. These interactions should focus on dispelling misinformation spread by Khalistani separatists. Justice and reconciliation. Committing to ensure justice for victims of past Khalistani-related violence and human rights violations can promote healing and reconciliation. Open channels of communication. India and Canada must ensure that communication channels remain open at various governmental levels to enable transparent discussions on concerns and grievances to obtain constructive solutions. Enhance counterterrorism cooperation. India and Canada should collaborate on counterterrorism by sharing intelligence, coordinating efforts to ensure the safety of both nations. Constructive dialogue on Khalistan. Encouraging respectful dialogue between the two nations, clarifying their positions and seeking common ground can ease tensions. Establish a neutral mediation. Both countries could consider involving a neutral third party or mediator to facilitate dialogues and negotiations to create a nonpartisan platform for resolving differences. Responsible media reporting. Encourage responsible media reporting to ensure an accurate and balanced portrayal of the relationship and public understanding of efforts to strengthen it. People-to-people connections. Both countries must promote people-to-people connections and conflict resolution through civil society and Track 2 diplomacy initiatives. Educational exchanges. Enhance educational and cultural exchanges to promote greater understanding of legacies of two nations and build bridges between the two nations. PSIR Optional Paper 2-Part B. Shunya IAS. Central Asia. Previous year's questions. Economic interest has emerged as the main component of India's foreign policy. Discuss the statement in the light of India's initiatives to improve relations with China, Japan, and the Central Asian republics. 2015. Bilateral data. 1. Economic trade. In 2023, India's trade with Central Asian countries stood at approximately $3 billion. This includes exports of pharmaceuticals, mechanical equipment, auto parts, and services, while imports primarily consist of fruits, vegetables, lubricants, and fertilizers. Eurasia Review. India Briefing. Nuclear fuel. Kazakhstan exports 80% of India's uranium. Dialogue. Indian Central Asia Business Council to promote business between both. Connectivity. INSTC Ashgabat Agreement to boost bilateral trade through Iran. 2. Cultural. 1. TC, under which young professionals of these countries undergo training and human capacity development. Bollywood. Large viewer market for Indian films. Yoga and traditional practices. Traditional medicine and yoga center in Ashgabat. India Central Asia Dialogue to improve the ties and connectivity. 3. Strategic. Military exercises. Kyrgyzstan Khanjar, Uzbekistan. Duslik Eurasian Heartland. Soft power contest between India and China. Chinese presence. Key routes of OB are through this region. Farkhor Air Base, Tajikistan. India's first military base in a foreign country. 4. Multilateral. SCO INES DC Tapi Gas Pipeline Ashgabat Agreement. SURNA. In recent times, Central Asia has gained increased importance due to several factors. Rise of religious fundamentalism. Despite being on the periphery, Central Asia has maintained a tolerant form of Islam. However, the region has witnessed the rise of religious fundamentalism, which poses a challenge to stability and security. The spread of radical ideologies and extremist groups in the region is a growing concern. Political instability. The political instability in Central Asian states can potentially strengthen radical elements. Weak governance, economic challenges, and ethnic tensions create an environment that can be exploited by extremist groups. The presence of these radical elements further adds to the security risks in the region. Non-conventional security threats. Central Asia faces non-conventional security threats, including organized crime and drug trafficking. The region serves as a transit route for the illegal drug trade, primarily involving Afghan narcotics. The activities of criminal networks pose challenges to the stability and development of Central Asian countries. Importance of India's relations with Central Asia. 1. Economic. Mineral security. Central Asia holds high reserves of key metals and rare earths. Trade routes. Historical trade routes have existed with Central Asia. Nuclear wealth. Central Asian ores are key to India's nuclear plants. Sunyas. Agriculture. Indian agribusiness companies can set up commercial agro-industrial complexes in Central Asia. Global markets. East-West Trans-Eurasian transit economic corridors merge at Central Asia. Oil companies. Opportunities for constructing oil and natural gas pipelines in the future. Stand on Chabahar Port. The port played an important role during the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan by delivering humanitarian goods to the Afghan people by international organizations. 2. Strategic. China. The area is China's backyard, thus key for Indian interests. Pakistan. Counterbalance Pakistan from using the Islamic card against India. Location. TLI area is bordered by Pakistan and China, thus important for India to manage new frontier, untapped sources of crucial minerals required to India in the future. India's role in Afghanistan's situation. India and TLI Central Asian countries have shared concerns over terrorism emanating from Afghanistan and its implications for regional security. India has been a strong proponent for re-establishing peace in Afghanistan. Like-mindedness in combating terrorism, India and the Central Asian nations have similarities in approach in countering terrorism and TLI threat of radicalization. Diplomatic ticks. India considers the Central Asian countries as the heart of Asia, and they are also members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO). 3. Historic ties. Civilizational influence. Central Asia is undoubtedly a zone of India's civilizational influence. The Fergana Valley was India's crossing point of TLI Great Silk Road. Buddhism also found inroads in several Central Asian cities in the form of stupas and monasteries. Foreign travelers, men of prominence such as Amir Khusro, Dehlavi, Al-Biruni etc. having Central Asian roots came and made their name in India. Concerns. 1. Economic. Lack of a direct trade route. There are obstructions of physical connectivity due to Pakistan's hostility and Afghan instability. J:\. Lack of a consolidated trade deal. China holds a bulk of Central Asian trade, whereas India's is minuscule. 2. Strategic. Extremism. There is a presence of terror groups in Dai region. Drug trade. Central Asia falls within the Golden Crescent for opium delays. The proposed INSTC and Ashgabat Agreement are facing implementation delays. Chinese dominance. Culturally and economically, China dominates the region. 3. Political. Politically unstable region. Central Asian countries are highly fragile and prone to threats like terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism, making Dai region a volatile and unstable market. Involvement of China in the region by the Belt and Road Initiative has significantly undermined India's influence in Dai region. 4. Security. Porous border and unbridled corruption, along with the proximity with regions of soaring opium production, Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle, makes the region a powerhouse for drug and money trafficking. Shunya IAS. Group of 20, G20. G20 was formed in 1999, in the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis of 1997 to 1998, and became the premier forum for international economic cooperation over the period of time. Every year it meets to discuss the global financial and socio-economic issues. Data. Members. The G20 is composed of 19 countries and the European Union. The 19 countries are Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, South Korea, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and the United States. GDP. The G20 countries account for approximately 80% of the world's GDP, with a combined GDP of around $85.8 trillion. Population. The G20 countries are home to approximately 2/3 of the world's population, with a total population of around 4.5 billion people. Trade. The G20 countries account for approximately 75% of global trade. CO2 emissions. The G20 countries are responsible for approximately 80% of global carbon dioxide Emissions. Military spending. The G20 countries account for approximately 85% of global military spending. Foreign direct investment. The G20 countries account for approximately 80% of global foreign direct investment. Significance of G20/relevance of G21. Maintain global order. Global politics. G20 influences the policies of the countries around the world in order to maintain global order. Address current issues. G20 helps in strategizing current issues. Example: G20 Global Smart Cities. Alliance on Technology Governance. Framework for Action on Marine Plastic Litter, etc. Authority on major international economic issues. The G20 plays an important role in shaping and strengthening global architecture and governance on international economic issues. Egalitarian grouping. It is an acceptable medium between the more elitist G7 and the 38-member Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, taming financial crisis. Example: Financial Stability Board. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, taming financial crisis. Example: Financial Stability Board, FSB, was established by G20 leaders following the onset of the global financial crisis. 2. To tackle global issues. Focus on low-income countries. It is a platform where leaders commit to working with developing countries, particularly low-income countries, by providing policy coherence, analysis, and practical tools to support growth and development. Fulfillment of SDGs. Achievements include measures to drive sustainable growth and enhance global stability. Cooperation on tax transparency, lowering cost of remittances, and increased female participation, etc. Rising protectionism. Example: US-China trade war. Global investments. Global FDI sliding continuously. Climate change. Increasing pollution and climate change, which need collaborative action. Challenges for G20. 1. Internal governance challenge. Though the group was intended to be more inclusive than G7, there is no formal membership criteria established still. 2. Skewed membership basis. The membership is based on a country's systemic importance to global financial markets and its contribution to GDP and trade only. There is no inclusive membership for the least developed countries. Shunya IAS. 3. No code or conduct established. There is a lack of a code of conduct for members and clear, enforceable rules that enable action against members if they breach any rules. Example: the group could have had a belter say in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war if such codes were established. 4. Multilateral commitments on aid and trade are faltering. This is because the role of the United Nations and the World Trade Organization in securing cooperation between donor and recipient country groups is losing centrality. Example: there are now 3 socio-economic systems: the G7, China, Russia, and India, and the others, and they will jointly set the global agenda. 5. Ensuring global economic growth. The G20 is responsible for ensuring global economic growth and stability. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a severe impact on the global economy, and the G20 must work to facilitate a strong and sustained recovery. 6. Addressing income inequality. The G20 has a responsibility to ensure that the benefits of economic growth are distributed equitably. This requires addressing income inequality within and between countries. 7. Geopolitical tensions. Geopolitical tensions spurred by strategic competition between China and the United States have increasingly threatened cooperation within the group. Example: countries are turning to international lenders for bailouts. The G20 introduced a common framework for debt treatment ahead of its 2020 summit, but only 3 countries, Chad, Ethiopia, and Zambia, have requested debt relief under the framework. 8. Friction regarding climate change. China, India, Russia, and Saudi Arabia reportedly blocked an agreement on phasing out coal use and fossil fuel subsidies at a July 2021 meeting of environment ministers. Example: following the invasion of Ukraine, Germany and other G20 countries have reneged on previous promises to stop financing fossil fuel projects overseas. Significance of G20 for India. Economic benefits. The G20 is a forum that brings together the world's largest economies, and India, as the 6th largest economy in the world, benefits from being a part of this group. The G20 provides India with an opportunity to engage with other major economies and promote its economic interests on the global stage. Addressing global issues. The G20 is an important forum for addressing global issues such as climate change, terrorism, and financial stability. As a developing country that faces significant challenges in these areas, India has a stake in the discussions and decisions made by the G20. Promoting India's global role. India sees itself as a major global player and seeks to play a larger role in international affairs. The G20 provides India with a platform to promote its global role and showcase its capabilities and achievements. Balancing relationships. India has successfully used this platform for trilateral meetings like Japan, Australia, India, and Russia, India, China, RIC, hence balancing its relationship with global powers. Cooperation with major powers. The G20 includes major powers such as the United States, China, and Russia. India seeks to deepen its engagement with these countries and promote cooperation on issues of mutual interest. Raise critical issues. India, being a regional power, can raise critical issues affecting the South Asia region. Represent the global South. India can also represent the interests of the developing world or the global South. Multilateralism, the G20 can be an effective platform to engage multilaterally with all major nations of the world. Advantages for India BV hosting the G20 summit. Economic benefits. Hosting the G20 summit can generate significant economic benefits for the host country, including increased tourism and business opportunities. The event can also create jobs and stimulate economic activity in the host city and country. PSIR optional paper 2-part B Shunya IAS. Recognition. The event is attended by leaders and officials from some of the world's largest economies and can help to showcase the host country's political and economic capabilities. Strengthening diplomatic ties. Hosting the G20 summit provides an opportunity for the host country to strengthen diplomatic ties with other member countries. The event can facilitate high-level discussions and negotiations and help to build relationships and alliances. Setting the agenda. As the host country, India would have a significant role in setting the agenda for the G20 summit. This provides an opportunity to prioritize issues of particular importance to India and to shape the discussions and outcomes of the event. Showcasing India's progress and achievements. India has made significant progress in areas such as economic development, renewable energy, and technology. Hosting the G20 summit would provide an opportunity to showcase India's progress and achievements in these areas and to position India as a major global player. Delhi Summit Highlights 2023. Inclusion of the African Union (AU). The African Union was admitted as a permanent member of the G20, enhancing the representation of the Global South and fostering closer ties with African nations. G20. Launch of the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor (TMEC). This new trade and transportation corridor aims to connect India, the Middle East, and Europe, enhancing economic integration and infrastructure development. India Briefing. Global Biofuel Alliance (GBA), initiated by India, Brazil, and the USA. The alliance promotes sustainable biofuel use, technology transfer, and increased biofuel blending to support climate action. India Briefing. Business Today. Climate action and renewable energy. G20 members committed to tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030 and emphasized the need for emissions to peak by 2025 despite not agreeing on a fossil fuel phase-out. India Briefing. Business Today. Digital public infrastructure and SDGs. The summit promoted digital public infrastructure for economy development and governance and reaffirmed commitments to achieving sustainable development. Goa. Including addressing plastic pollution and ocean health. Way forward. COVID collective action. India must highlight the need for more collaborative efforts in technology transfer, vaccine development, and aiding the developing countries. Developing nations. India, as a representative of the developing world, must put forward the agenda of poverty and malnutrition as well as the global platform. Pac-based terror. There is also a need to use the platform to highlight the terror networks existing in Pakistan and their role in affecting the region. Afghan peace process. G20 is a useful platform for India to showcase its increasing role in Afghan development and how it should be involved in all talks regarding Afghanistan. Climate change. The key requirement for India is climate finance, which the developed countries are reluctant to give. Thus, the G20 can be an effective platform to highlight India's requirements. Roader peace. Peace and stability in the world can be brought about through global cooperation and especially through the G20 it will be effective and long-lasting. Revised theoretical framework of macro and microeconomics. G20 members need to incorporate lessons from the recent crisis to advocate policy actions based on economic theory that needs revision. Avoiding internal fracturing, collective action, and problem-solving should be encouraged that transcends traditionally like-minded groups of countries. Improving outreach. The G20 must promote equitable international economic arrangements that provide a larger voice and role for the major economies of the Global South. Establishing a code of conduct for the members. By having an established code of conduct, the group can have a better say on controlling the acts of aggressive members like China and Russia. Shunya as 1 carat. India's G20 presidency and its priorities. India's G20 presidency is centered around the theme of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one Earth, one family, one future, and aims to showcase India's rich cultural heritage and provide a unique Indian experience to G20 delegates and guests. Priorities of India's G20 presidency included green development, climate finance, and life. India emphasizes climate change as a key priority, focusing on climate finance, technology, and just energy transitions for developing nations. It promotes lifestyle for environment, a behavior-based movement drawing from India's sustainable traditions to encourage environmentally conscious practices. Accelerated, inclusive, and resilient growth. India aims to foster accelerated, inclusive, and resilient growth. India aims to foster accelerated, resilient, and inclusive growth through structural transformations. It seeks to integrate MSMEs into global trade, promote labor rights and welfare, address the global skills gap, and develop inclusive agricultural value chains and food systems. Accelerating progress on SDGs. India recognizes impact of COVID-19 on 2030 agenda and aims to recommit G20's efforts to achieve targets of TLI Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Technological transformation and digital public infrastructure. India advocates for a human-centric approach to technology, focusing on areas like digital public infrastructure, financial inclusion, and tech-enabled development across sectors. Multilateral institutions for the 21st century. India prioritizes reformed multilateralism, aiming for a more accountable, inclusive, just, equitable, and representative multipolar international system capable of addressing 21st century challenges. Women-led development. India highlights inclusive growth and development, with a particular focus on women empowerment and representation. It aims to bring women to the forefront and in leadership positions to drive socioeconomic development and achieve the SDGs. Conclusion. While the world today is at the cusp of drastic geopolitical, geoeconomics, and technological transformations, India's optimistic call for inclusiveness and reformed multilateralism /XDLL definitely be tested through its presidency at G20. India's stance will be tested in its efforts to bridge gaps and foster cooperation among nations with diverse interests and priorities. Shunya.